Hello, everyone. Omni-Sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in MHA with Vampire Bloodline, Part 4. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Mirko stared down at the villain who had landed hard on the ground below, his body burrowing deep into the soil. If he had landed on the other side of the stadium, then they would have been in trouble since some people might have seen him. But thankfully, he landed at the part of the stadium backing a small lush forest. Mirko turned to face the two boys who had fought him. What the hell happened here? The two boys were bruised all over. One of them was not even able to stand properly and was leaning by the wall, breathing heavily. The other one was like a chimera of different animals, which were slowly receding, turning back to normal. The sports festival is under attack. The boy with green hair went on to explain everything that happened to Mirko, leaving nothing out. Mirko listened to everything he said, absorbing the information. Then she sighed angrily and cursed. It doesn't make sense. No matter how much she thought about it, the man she had fought along with his associate were not involved with this new group. I have had a few run-ins with the first set that we fought. Mirko began. They always work alone. Their objectives are often very clear, and they complete their assignments with brutal efficiency. If this group wasn't associated with them, then there was no way to know that the top UA staff would be out of the fight. Deku's brows furrowed as he contemplated her words. You are right. If they had no idea that he was here. He rubbed his chin as he thought deeply. Then their fighting force is severely lacking. Although the man they had fought was incredibly strong, Eraserhead combined with one of the more combat-related teachers should have been enough to take them. And yet, this new group seemed to be targeting the teachers? How did they plan to pull it? Deku's eyes suddenly widened the moment they landed on an object sitting idly by the other side of the room. The bombs. Beep, beep, beep. It was in that moment that he realized. They never planned on taking out the teachers alone. They were gathering all the teachers to where the bombs were to take them out at once. The bombs suddenly flashed red, creating beeping sounds that made Deku's heart race. And then a dark green energy covered all the windows and doors, cutting off whatever exit they had left. Their fate was sealed. At least that was what Deku thought until he saw someone run past him. Sunita hurriedly ran and slapped a device on the bomb. A spark of current emerged from it, and then the beeping died down, the bomb becoming silent. The green energy that had locked them inside the room vanished as well, calm returning to the small space. Everyone in the room heaved a breath, staring at the now deactivated bombs. Tamaki sighed. Bomb neutralizers from the support course. Deku fell to the floor, sweating profusely. If they hadn't met the support course, then they would have been blown to bits. Mirko then walked over to the window and peered down. Even though the villain had been knocked down that distance, he still had a remote clutched in his hand, his expression fierce as he stared up at them. Although she was exhausted, Mirko climbed the windowsill, about to put him down for good when he pulled out another device and crushed it in his hand. Immediately, a bright golden glow surrounded him, and then he vanished into thin air, the only evidence he was once there being the large man-shaped hole in the floor. So that was how they were planning to escape while they set off the bomb. You guys stay here. I'm going to check out the other areas. When Lemillion saw his teacher being dragged like a bag of dirt, his blood staining the floor like his life was worth nothing, he did not know how to react. All he felt at that moment was rage, a bitter anger that took over his mind. His face contorted, his eyebrows drew taut as every single muscle in his body tensed. Who do you think you are? The villain stopped and threw Present Embassy to the side like a pile of trash. Then he adjusted his posture, his glowing yellow eyes narrowing slightly. Pust. The villain's voice began to slowly adjust until it became clear enough to understand. Pulse, number 2 of the Fallen Legion. Lemillion breathed in air as though he was inhaling fire, letting out a battle cry as he dashed forward, fueled by rage and anguish. His eyes were locked on Pulse as he jumped, sending his fist flying right at his face. TZZZZ. Pulse vibrated, and lightning surged out of his body and licked the floor, burning it on contact. The air was filled with static. Lemillion launched his blow, But Pulse took a step back, completely evading his attack. Another step, and he was right behind Lemillion, like a haughty shadow. In a flash, he reached for his face, his fingers reaching towards Lemillion's eyes, far too fast for him to dodge. Lemillion clenched his jaw, wincing as the hand came, only for the hand to pass right through. Pulse tilted his head slightly, his confusion evident, while Lemillion smiled. Just kidding. Bang! Lemillion's fist exploded against Pulse's face, an audible crunch reaching his ears as he followed up with another blow, this time a sharp kick to the gut. But just as his foot came flying, Pulse caught it, his eyes narrowing as he stared right into Lemillion's eyes. And then he pulled him towards himself, driving a knee so fast that Lemillion barely had time to turn intangible. The knee cut right through his chest, Lemillion feeling just a sliver of pain before the foot passed through him his fast. Lemillion thought. Any little mistake, and he would be dead. Pulse delivered a right jab and a chop, followed it up by 2 fast kicks, and then an elbow thrust. But every single thing went right through Lemillion's body, as though he was never even there. While his attacks went on, Lemillion was taking note of whatever he could see, trying to find any opportunity to strike. He gritted his teeth. He's just too fast. No matter how much he watched him, there were little to no weak points. If not for his intangibility, the match would have ended in the first minute. I have to be patient. The room was suddenly bathed in yellow as Pulse raced from place to place, launching a series of super-fast blows. But the results were the same, and then just as another blow phased through Lemillion's head, now. His eyes glinted, his muscles contracting as Lemillion lunged, delivering a bone-crushing blow right to his gut, throwing him down to the floor. Just as he was landing, Nejira's spiral beam came crashing right at him, blasting the ground to bits. Both of them stared at the dust, expecting him to suddenly rise from it. But strangely, for a few seconds, it was silent. The dust settled, and crouched in it was Pulse, staring at the ground. It was almost as if he was thinking. Then his eyes widened slightly, lightning pulsing out of his amber slits. There was a sound of a thunderclap as his body blurred, his form a streak of motion as he surged forward like a rocket. Lemillion activated his quirk once more and then deactivated it the moment he phased through him, swinging his arm at the back of his head. But this time, Pulse did not come back. Instead, he changed his trajectory and dashed right towards Nejira. Pulse bounced from place to place, and the air filled up with static as he sprinted, this time stalking Nejira, finding the perfect angle to cut her down. Nejira was nervously looking around, her arms raised as she tried to predict where he would attack from. It was almost as if he was everywhere at the same time, at every angle, seeing even the slightest gap in her defense. Her quirk took a lot out of her, so she was already tired from fighting Moonfish, and yet she fired more shots, completely missing the villain. Just as she unleashed another blow, she saw him, his long horns pulsing, his face right next to hers and his arm lifted to cut her to pieces. But just before the arm came, Lemillion appeared right behind her. He grabbed her by the waist, pulling her back as he jumped backward to dodge. But it was just what Pulse had wanted. Tagata. SCHKKKK. Blood filled the air, some splashing in Nejira's face as Pulse struck, his fingers digging into Lemillion's left shoulder. Lemillion swallowed his scream as their feet ground to a halt. Then he shielded Nejira with one arm, while the other was lying limp by his side. Nejira stared at his wound, her fingers shaking. "I'm sorry, Mirio. This is my fault." Lemillion grunted from the pain and smiled, his eyes still locked on the villain who was dashing from place to place. He tried to move his left arm, grunting in pain when he failed to do so. "Don't say that. It's not your fault. Anyone would have a problem fighting someone this fast." Pulse was stalking them, bouncing from wall to wall so fast that Lemillion found it difficult even to keep track of his movements. Still, Lemillion raised his fist, his eyes narrowing at the impossible task set before him. To keep up with someone faster than you, then all you had to do was predict their movements. Pulse appeared like a ghost, his dark hand flying right at Lemillion's face, only to pass right through. Lemillion landed the first blow, pushing him back, then he vanished, falling into the floor and popping right behind Pulse. Whoosh! Pulse tilted his head, Lemillion's punch just brushing past his ears. Then both of them drove their fists forward, the two massive blows meeting in the center with a force that caused both their arms to tremble. Pulse skidded back and paused. The lightning emanating from his body became even more oppressive, coiling around him like energetic serpents. Bam! From the side of the room, Najira blasted her energy at him, the swirling beam curving from the side to strike. Pulse sidestepped it with ease, zooming to meet Lemillion. He raised his hand to grab his face, all 5 fingers extended, and like every other time, it phased through. But Pulse did not stop. He cut right through Lemillion, racing towards Najira. The latter unleashed another blast that charged right at him, but Pulse raised his hands, lightning forming on them just before he cleaved the blast in half. The energy beam fizzled to nothing. Before he could reach Najira, Lemillion popped up right in front of her and drove his foot forward, but Pulse sidestepped him, his body a blur. A heavy blow crashed into Lemillion's knee, then Pulse grabbed his leg, flinging him to the other side of the room. But to his surprise, bam! Lemillion went right through the floor, vanishing for a moment before popping out right underneath Pulse, cracking his head up with an uppercut. He kicked him in the gut, jabbed him in the neck, and was about to unleash another attack when Pulse disappeared, appearing right behind him. Crack! A lightning-infused blow exploded against his back, knocking him to the ground. Pulse then drove his finger down, but all it met was plain concrete, shattering the ground where he once lay. Lemillion returned to where Najira stood, his arms raised to protect her. He gritted his teeth as he watched Pulse. His back felt like it was on fire, the pain radiating like electric waves. But he could not focus on the pain, not when they were a few steps from death. He is purposely keeping Najira alive to bait me into undoing my permeation. Although Lemillion was keeping up with him, it was only barely. The only reason he had survived this long was because his quirk allowed him to be practically invisible to attacks. While Najira was a terrible match for the villain, Lemillion's quirk perfectly countered his. It didn't matter how fast you were. If you couldn't touch someone, then there was practically no way to defeat them. But time was running out for Lemillion. He was showing heavy signs of exhaustion, and the injuries he had gotten were accumulating, weighing him down. If the fight didn't end soon, then he would be too tired to continue. He wiped the sweat off his brow and turned to Najira, lowering his voice. "I'm going to grab him. When I do, blast us with as much power as you can muster. Don't worry, I won't get hit." Najira nodded, her expression turning serious as she lifted her arms. "I'm ready." Pulse and Lemillion exchanged a few blows like they had been doing since the start of the fight. And after a few exchanges, Lemillion finally found his golden opportunity. He sprang up from the floor and grabbed Pulse from behind, his arms locking him in place. Then he lifted his feet from the ground to prevent him from escaping. Now Najira. Najira sucked in a sharp breath as she levitated from the ground, unleashing a blast so large that it covered nearly the entire room. Lemillion held onto Pulse up until the ripples were upon them, only turning intangible when he could feel the burn of the blast. Boom! The room was turned into a mess of broken concrete, dust, and smoke that clouded every single inch of the space. Najira was trying to look through the smoke, the concern visible on her face as she searched for signs of Tagata. Then she noticed something move within the smoke. Tagata. No, it was not the friendly, talkative friend she knew. What emerged from the smoke was electricity, pure, unsullied currents that moved like a bolt of lightning. Najira's eyes widened as she saw it pierce through the smoke, charging right at her. She had used up her energy in that last attack. Moreover, it was moving far too fast for her to dodge. She closed her eyes and covered her head with her arms, waiting for the pain to come. But it never came. When she opened her eyes, Lemillion was standing right in front of her, his body oozing dark smoke as he crumpled to the floor. Tagata, Ek. Pulse grabbed her throat, lifting her above the floor, her feet flailing as he squeezed. His body was burnt, his clothing was ragged, and even one of his horns was damaged. Yet, he was just as dangerous as ever. Dark spots began to appear in Najira's vision, her mind slowly fading to darkness, and just as she was about to lose consciousness, there was a blur of red, and a buzz of crimson lightning. A large dark wind appeared, slashing down like an indomitable blade. Blood poured and Pulse stumbled back, shrieking in pain. Najira blinked, only to discover that she was being carried like a princess by a strange man. He had crimson wings that made him resemble a fallen angel, messy raven-black hair and a golden mask that gleamed in the faint lightning. And although there was a smile on his face, in his hand was Pulse's arm, still dripping fresh blood. The man stared down at Lemillion's scorched body, and he frowned, his gaze moving to Pulse. Then the room trembled. Kyle had waited for just the right time. When he was sure that both sides had exhausted themselves, he slipped away from the food truck and back into the stadium. He did not intervene at first. Instead, he stalked the stadium, listening in on conversations and gathering information. That was how he knew that this new group were calling itself the Fallen Legion and that it was a joint mission by them and the League. Holding Najira in his arms, Kyle glanced at Mirio, whose body was smoking like a drably cooked steak, then sighed. Although Mirio was a hero in training, both he and Najira were his very important business partners. It was only because of them he had gotten such a deal, which made him feel like he owed them, even if it was just a bit. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet Pulse, who was now armless, then smirked. "You've really done it now." Kyle expected Pulse to charge right at him without thinking, but to his surprise he waited, his eyes narrowing as he watched Kyle, studying him. Pulse raised his free hand, using his electricity to burn his wound closed, the smell of burning flesh floating into the air. And then he moved, electricity seeping out of his feet as he lunged. But Kyle moved before him, sidestepping the speedster, and just as he was passing Kyle, he bashed the severed arm right into the back of his head. Bang! Pulse lost his footing, taking him down in a nasty roll until he slammed into the wall. Najira stared at Pulse wide-eyed before looking at Kyle. Who are you?" Kyle was silent. He placed her feet on the ground and then shielded her with his body. "Take that one to the infirmary. I'll take care of things here." A worried expression appeared on her face. "You can't beat him alone. He's not an average villain." In front of them, Pulse had already gotten up and was plotting his next move. "Go." Najira stared at both fighters one more time before hurriedly lifting Mirio, slinging his arm over her shoulder and levitating towards present MIC to take him as well. But Pulse had no plans of letting them escape. Ignoring Kyle, he sprinted right at them, hoping to finish off what he started, only to slam into an invisible wall. Kyle's wings fanned out, electricity coursing through them. "Leaving when we just started? Don't be rude. Interferences must be eliminated." Pulse appeared right next to Kyle, unleashing a flurry of lightning-coated blows. His fast. The first two blows were blocked by fierce wings, but the other two landed cleanly, shoving him back, the current searing his skin. Pulse was moving too fast to keep up with, delivering blows and kicks only to dash away before Kyle could reach him. Even with only one arm, his blows were a menace to dodge, and it was as though he was moving even faster with each passing second. Although Kyle was in no way slow, Pulse was something else when it came to speed. But during that time, Kyle was studying him, taking note of his attack patterns and planning his counterattacks. Up till this very moment, Pulse raced towards him in zigzag patterns. He ran to a wall, using it to boost himself, jumping to deliver a flying punch. But this time, an invisible force slammed into him midair, and before he could land, Kyle sprinted right next to him. His fingers hardened like they were made of adamantine, his skin glowing with a tint of red as he delivered a massive blow right into his gut. His body folded, the punch dug deep just before he was launched back. Now that Kyle had managed to land a blow, he did not give Pulse any breathing room. He charged right at him, kicking him like a ball the moment he touched the floor, then he grabbed his leg, slamming him on his back, before lifting his foot to stomp his head to bits. But before the leg came down, Pulse twisted his body, using a complex maneuver to get to his feet. And then he jumped, two heavy kicks exploding against Kyle's guard. Like a phantom, he appeared right behind Kyle, two right hooks barely missing his head. And then, to Kyle's surprise, he grabbed his face with his left hand, the very arm that he had severed. "He can heal." Pulse pulled Kyle towards him and rammed his shoulder right into his gut, launching him to the other side. But almost immediately, Kyle's wings spread out, stopping the momentum. And out of them came several sharpened feathers, racing towards Pulse like hypersonic bullets. Whoosh! More electricity surged out of Pulse's body, his skin beginning to glow a pale gold. And then he moved from side to side, his body blurring before he charged right at Kyle. Bang! Bang! Boom! He dodged the first flurry of feathers, curling in the air and even using one as a stepping stone to lunge at Kyle. But just as he arrived, Kyle's wings folded and then spread out, releasing a gust of wind and red electricity that knocked the air out of him. And then Kyle dove like a hawk, twisting his body to allow his wings to lash out like a blade. Swish! Pulse's arm was once again severed off, the lump of flesh already bubbling to start the regeneration process. But Kyle was not yet done. He grabbed Pulse's leg just before he landed and pulled him towards himself. 3 quirks. Huh? You're a bigger problem than I imagined. First, he used Kaminari's quirk to coat his fist with deadly currents. Then he used Aura Punch to add an additional layer of destructive force. His arms hardened next, his fingers becoming strong enough to tear through stone, and then his muscles contracted, becoming so large that his biceps dwarfed his head. Then he drew his arm back. Just as Pulse was flying towards him, eyes wide, arms raised up in defense, Kyle unleashed a blow capable of ripping boulders apart. Boom! On contact, Pulse's good arm folded like a plank, his bones cracking into hundreds of pieces, just before the punch exploded against his chest, driving him down to the floor. Bang! The wind picked up from the sheer force of the attack. Red currents mixed with yellow electricity sparked in the air, and then a shockwave cut right past them, sending dust billowing in all directions. Kyle cracked his fingers, the energy fizzling away from his hand as he stared down at Pulse. 3 quirks. He had super speed, could open portals, and now he had shown that he was capable of regeneration. Having 2 quirks was already seen as a rarity. Having 3 was something Kyle had never heard of in the anime. At least not naturally. Which only meant one thing. He was gifted those quirks. Just that realization alone was enough to twist the entire plot, because the only one known to gift quirks was All for One. Was it that someone with a quirk similar to All for One had always existed? Or was All for One secretly the benefactor of this group? And if so, why? As Kyle stared at Pulse's smoking body, he realized something he had not noticed up until now. The black supersuit that he thought he was wearing was no supersuit. It was his skin. That means he is a Nomu, or rather, something like a Nomu. A female voice came, one that was smoother than honey but with a noticeable foreign accent. Kyle heard her footsteps click, her sharp heels digging into the floor as she walked a little, keeping a respectable distance between herself and him. Kyle turned to her and frowned. Although he had not interacted with her much, he recognized her immediately as one of the villains that clashed with the Villain League. Her pure white clothes and matching hair were a dead giveaway. The woman crossed her arms around her chest, her movements slow, almost seductive. What do you mean by something like? Kyle asked, glancing at the entrance to make sure no one else was coming. She glanced at Pulse and frowned, slowly shaking her head. You seem to know a lot of things that are not open to the public. She replied, ignoring his question. I guess it won't be that easy. She paused and opened her hand fan. If I were a half-wit like the rest of these people, I would have assumed you were a secret weapon from the Hero Commission. But I can tell just by one glance. You are different. You are unhinged. You are like a beast. Kyle smiled. Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm guessing after eliminating your old leader, you're in charge now. The woman seemed offended by his words, but she tried to hide it. The Fallen Legion could never be under the command of such a muckworm. She sighed and took another step forward, her movement still cautious. He was but a means to an end. I see. The woman smiled. Where are my manners? I seem to have forgotten to introduce myself. Most call me the White Lady, or Abound, but you can refer to me as Melissa if those are unsavory. Then her expression suddenly darkened. Now that we are properly acquainted, Mr. Vigilante, can I politely ask you to stay the hell out of my way? She said, her voice running cold at the end. She smiled, but there was no joy in it. It was a calm rage that she was barely holding back. First Kyle had interrupted their plan to take down the League, and now he had completely destroyed their plans for the festival. Kyle raised a brow. And what if I say no? What can you do about it? Melissa smirked. The world is far bigger than you think, Vigilante. There are many ways to deal with an error such as yourself. Kyle chuckled, almost transforming into full-blown laughter, and then the air seemed to shift. An oppressive aura suddenly rolled out of his skin, encapsulating the room. "Are you threatening me?" he asked, his voice as cold as the Arctic. Unlike most people who have been exposed to primordial terror, Melissa actually managed to stand her ground, her expression shifting slightly as sweat formed on her face. What is this?" Her eyes widened slightly, her body about to succumb to fear, but she hugged her shoulders and took deep breaths. A few seconds later, the aura was lifted, the room returning back to normal. Kyle cursed internally. "My energy levels are too low." After his fight with the teachers and now with Pulse, he had little energy left, so he decided to reserve it. Melissa immediately sucked in a sharp breath as the weight was lifted off her shoulders. She stared up at Kyle, her eyes filled with rage. "You can't hide forever, vigilante." Kyle began walking towards her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Hide? Who is hiding?" She was in no way faster than Pulse, so Kyle could easily grab her. But he had to be careful since he wasn't perfectly sure what her quirk was. But before he could even come within 10 feet of her, a bright golden glow appeared, sucking her into it. Simultaneously, Pulse also vanished, engulfed by the same golden glow. Kyle sighed angrily. "The world is far bigger than I think. Hey. What did she mean by that?" He wondered as he stared at the empty space in front of him. At the end of the day, not even a single villain involved in the incident was captured. The two villains that had been knocked out mysteriously disappeared before the heroes could get to them, leaving no traces behind. But thanks to the efforts of everyone, the sports festival continued as planned, with Bakugo emerging victorious just like in the story. Ms. Joke was taken to the hospital, and thankfully, all she suffered were a few broken ribs and internal bleeding. Present MIC fell into a coma after sustaining severe injuries from Pulse. The doctors assured the heroes that he would wake up soon, but no one knew how long it would take. Mirio was hospitalized as well, and although his injuries were not as severe, it would take a while before he would be leaving the hospital. His near-death experience with Najira deepened the bond between the two, and the latter began spending most of her days with him in the hospital. Deku was dissatisfied with his performance in both the cultural festival and his fight with the villains, so he ended up isolating himself to train his body. Kyle's intervention in the final battle only made heroes more confused about what his true objectives were. But at the end of everything, they had discovered one crucial detail on how he obtained quirks, which allowed them to create a distinction between him and One for All. The next day, the morning sunlight filtered into an otherwise dark room, illuminating a messy bed and clothes scattered here and there. There was a small mouse sleeping in a can of savory popcorn, and a light melodious tune in the air. A young man was staring at himself in the mirror, adjusting his collar as he put on his shirt. Strangely, his crimson eyes seemed redder, as though soaked in blood, and his skin appeared a little paler than usual. He brushed his hair back and smiled, his reflection fading slightly in the glass. Then he grabbed his phone and keys, glancing at the message just before he stepped out of the room. After grabbing his keys, Kyle headed downstairs, the music following him as he went. Today, Kyle was feeling ecstatic. Not only had he accomplished the goals he had set out for himself, but he had also managed to make a large sum out of the UA deal. But that was only the start. During the festival, Kyle had made sure the brand name was well known and even went as far as handing out coupons to the customers. Because of this, the traffic to his cafe would only grow in the coming days, meaning he would be making more money. Kyle smiled as he hurried down the steps, 2 steps at a time. But although he wanted to visit the cafe and organize things, today was specially reserved for someone else, Himiko. She had been kind enough to wait this long, so Kyle wanted to make sure today would be a memorable one. That was why he even took out time to dress up. A little at least. Sumi had gone to work early as usual, so there was no one in the living room when he arrived. He turned off the lights and locked the door behind him before going into the garage. Unlike last time they went out, this time Kyle was the one picking Himiko up, but when Kyle read the address she gave, he raised a brow. Tilda Kagura Central Library. What is she doing at the library? He wondered as he started the car's engine. I guess I'll find out when I get there. Not long after Kyle began driving, the sky darkened and the rain came down like a dam had broken in the heavens. The rain splashed against his windshield with so much intensity that even his wipers were struggling to keep up. And the wind blew forcefully against the glass, further increasing the intensity of the rain. Soon, the cars began to drive slowly, a red blur of lights in all directions as drivers turned on their caution lights. What a way to start the day. Although Kyle enjoyed watching storms because of how rhythmic they could be, today was different. Today, he had a date. How are we supposed to go out in this weather? Kyle breathed out a sigh and picked up his phone to call Himiko. He wanted to be sure she wasn't standing somewhere in the rain. But the rain seemed to have affected the network lines as well, because all he got was an annoying beep, followed by a feminine voice that told him she was unreachable. He quickly sent her a text message before focusing on the drive, weaving through the slow cars while he listened to the pouring rain. Kogura Central Library was a tall, imposing building that looked as though it was built for a different era. Although it was well maintained, it was hard to not notice the signs of the building's true age. Two tall pillars stood at the entrance, with a long banner hanging from both sides, the name of the library written on them. Kyle pulled up to a stop in the parking lot and glanced at the building through his glass, his eyebrows furrowing together. With the dark clouds, heavy thunderclaps, and flashes in the sky, the old building almost seemed haunted. Using his excellent vision, Kyle scanned the front of the library as well as the areas around it, looking to see if Himiko was somewhere underneath the shades, but there was no one. He hurried out of his car and sprinted through the pouring rain. But like a devious fiend, the rain was determined to have him in its embrace. Just in the few seconds in which he had been exposed, Kyle's jacket was thoroughly soaked and was dripping wet. He entered the library and took off the jacket, looking for where to hang it when he noticed a girl at the information desk. It was Himiko, although she looked rather strange. Kyle walked up to the desk to have a closer look. She was wearing a white blouse tucked into a long flared skirt that went down past her knees, and she had a pair of clear-rimmed reading glasses on. But on closer inspection, Kyle realized that they were regular glasses. Without looking up from the book in her hand, Himiko stretched her hand forward. "What do you want? The library opens by 9 a.m. Heh." She suddenly froze when her eyes met him. "'Kay, Kyle?" Himiko squatted down, hiding underneath the shelf while muttering something to herself. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice lowered but sharp. Kyle raised a brow. "Your text said Kogura Central Library, 8 o'clock, I meant 8 p.m. she hissed, her face burning red from embarrassment. "Well, anyone would confuse it if you didn't specify." Kyle smiled and leaned over the desk, his tone teasing. "Why didn't you want me to come early? Are you trying to hide your unique sense of fashion?" Himiko sprang up, only to bump the center of her head into Kyle's jaw. She held her head with both hands, frowning as her face turned even redder. When Himiko finally settled down, Kyle idly glanced at the library before returning his attention to her. "So, why are you dressed this way?" Himiko sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's the dress code. I got a job here." Kyle reined in his laughter. "I see." Himiko playfully punched his arm, then blinked when she noticed how wet he was. "Were you out in the rain?" "Just a little." She frowned and glanced at the library, as though looking for something. "Give me your jacket. Let me take you somewhere." Kyle handed her the jacket and she folded it on her arm as she left the information desk, leading him deeper into the library. He followed Himiko, who was marching through the library with poise befitting a strict librarian. Now that she had donned their full regalia, she looked just like those cranky women who were more interested in breathing down your shoulders than doing their jobs. Himiko frowned, shooting him a glare as she stared at him from over her shoulder. "This is why I didn't want you to come." Kyle tilted his head slightly. "I'm glad I came. I wouldn't have seen you dressed up this cutely if I didn't." Himiko blinked. Then she quickly looked forward. "I guess it's not so bad," she said, her voice low. They ended up walking for about 2 minutes, even going to the next floor, before arriving in front of an old wooden door. Himiko took out her keys and stuck them into the hole. "You won't believe what I'm about to show you." The door opened with an odious creak that would have alerted the whole library. But because of the pouring rain and the fact that the library opened at 9 a.m., the library was empty. Within the room, Kyle saw a large couch in front of an inactive fireplace. It was like a secluded reading room, and judging by the decor, it was probably built when the library was first constructed several years ago. Himiko smiled mischievously as she turned to face him. "Since it's raining, we can have a little fun here, can't we?" Kyle walked into the room, inspecting it with a curious gaze. Just as he expected, the room was very old. Unlike the rest of the library, the room didn't seem to have been renovated in years. But that didn't mean it was in poor condition. It was strangely well maintained. The couch was free of dust, the doors were spotless, and the fireplace had been cleared of any residual ash. There were 2 windows by the side of the room shut tightly, giving them a nice view of the outside of the library as the rain bounced over the glass. It was cozy. "What is this place for?" Himiko placed his jacket on the couch and walked over to the fireplace, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "It's a private reading room, one that was built when the library was constructed." She picked up some wood and began arranging it in the fireplace. "Now only staff are allowed up here. But my boss isn't around, so." Himiko glanced at him. "We have the room to ourselves." Kyle smiled nervously, looking at another side of the room. She can't say date, but is okay with sharing a room alone. Just the thought of both of them being locked here alone, in an empty library, during a storm. Kyle let out a steamy breath. Stop overthinking things. Unknown to him, he was not the only one having these thoughts. Himiko was trying to act as stoic as she possibly could, but the wood was shaking in her grip as she arranged it. And her heart was thrumming so loudly that she feared Kyle would hear it despite the rain. As if that wasn't enough, as she was having those thoughts, Kyle grabbed her arm and turned her to face him. Their eyes met, and a second passed between them in silence, neither of them uttering a word. Then Kyle looked past her. "What are you doing?" Himiko blinked. "Heh." Kyle squatted down next to her and took the firewood off her hands. "Why are you stacking it up like you're building a tower?" he asked, his voice playful. "You should spread them out." Their shoulders were touching as Kyle arranged the wood the right way, his focus completely aimed at the fireplace. Himiko cleared her throat, her cheeks feeling hot. "What do you mean? That is the right way to arrange the wood," she said, grabbing the wood back. Kyle picked up another piece. "It isn't a clock tower." Himiko folded her arms across her chest. "I'm telling you, I have done this over 100 times already. This is how to do it." Kyle sat down, using one hand to support himself. "All right, then." Crash. Just as Himiko finished stacking them up, the entire thing crumbled to the ground, blowing dust in her face. Kyle smiled, raising a brow as he watched her failure. "It looks perfect." Himiko pouted and sat back, allowing Kyle to set up the fire. A few minutes later, the fire sparked to life, the golden flames licking the wood, as crackling sounds reached their ears. They both watched the beautiful fire, enveloped by the warmth. Then Kyle turned to Himiko. "All right, Miko, what should we do first?" Their date was meant to be spent at various places, but with the rain and Kyle's early arrival, their plans had been all but ruined. Now they had to make do with what they had. Himiko's brows creased, and a few seconds later, her face brightened up, leaving a concerning smile on her lips. She got to her feet and walked over to one of the shelves, pulling it open, and then she brought out a series of games. From cards to board games to even a few games Kyle did not recognize. Kyle gave her a deadpan look. "Why do you have so many games?" Himiko shrugged. "I seized them, of course." She proudly placed her hands on her waist. "Games aren't allowed, so when caught, you can either submit the game or be banned for life." She walked over to the couch and sat down. Guess what option they picked? Kyle got up and walked towards her. "You are becoming a full-fledged librarian, you know, right?" Himiko playfully frowned while waving him over. "Come, let's play." They started off with poker, where Himiko showed her concerning addiction to gambling. Even though they were game chips, she treated them like they were real money, making high-risk gambles only to lose everything in the end. The two of them continued playing, moving from game to game. Occasionally there would be the sound of light laughter, sometimes the frustrated squeal of the loser, which was mostly Himiko. Because of the sheer amount of games Himiko had, they didn't get bored and ended up spending hours in the little room. And at that time, the rain only seemed to intensify. At the end of it, Kyle was seated on the couch, holding a book Himiko had recommended and flipping through the pages, while Himiko was at the other edge, stealing glances at him. She took in a deep breath and stole another glance. "Just do it, Himiko." Himiko was in a dilemma. So far, since they had met, she had not seen Kyle nervous even once, while she had been as red as a tomato almost throughout. I have to make him nervous at least once. That was her conviction. She had spent hours binging on romance novels and had picked up a few tricks from reading them. Things that were better left in novels than brought into real life. Which was why she made a move that she would have never dreamed of making. Himiko leaned closer to Kyle and smiled nervously. "It's been a while since I read that novel. Can I join you?" "Oh, sure." Kyle was about to adjust his position when Himiko pushed him back, crawling underneath his arm to rest her back on his chest. Himiko covered her face from embarrassment, then glanced up to see Kyle's reaction. His eyes had widened slightly from shock, but his face remained as pale as Jade's. What she didn't know was that Kyle had used his blood manipulation to alter his reaction to her teasing. She frowned and rested her back on him, staring at the book in front of her as he flipped the page. "I can't believe it didn't work. Ba-dump ba-dump." Himiko froze and listened closely. "What is that sound?" It took a few seconds for her to realize that it was not only her heart that had gone into overdrive. Although it was not showing on his face, Kyle had undoubtedly been affected. She smiled victoriously, snuggling in closer, enveloped by his warmth as they continued reading. They continued like this for more than half an hour before Kyle placed his hand on her waist and nestled his chin on her head. "K Kyle?" Himiko stuttered. Kyle smiled and closed the book. "You're like a little teddy bear. So soft and squishy." "MHA." He chuckled. Then his expression darkened slightly. "I was going to ignore this because we weren't being bothered. But Miko, you know we aren't the only ones in this room, right?" Lightning flashed, engulfing the room in a bright white light, and out of the corner of the room, a silhouette appeared, holding a large staff in one hand, and a gun in the other. From the moment they entered the room, Kyle had sensed the presence of someone else. But at that time, their breaths were calm and rhythmic, meaning they were fast asleep, so Kyle ignored them. There was no reason to ruin the perfect atmosphere he and Himiko were enjoying after all, and he figured they were just another staff member. But now, the person had woken up and crept up to them, holding two questionable items: a gun and a long stick. If it were any other group, then they would have been on their knees, begging for their lives. But Kyle just stared at them blankly, while Himiko yawned tiredly. Although they were standing in the shadow cast by the flickering fire, Kyle could easily see them perfectly well. A woman, probably in her 30s, with long purple hair, dark circles surrounding her eyes and a confused expression on her face. She was quivering as she pointed the gun forward. Her eyes glazed over in fear. Who are you?" Himiko placed her hand on Kyle's chest to prop herself up. "It's me, Anika. Didn't I tell you to throw that fake gun away?" "Himiko." The woman's eyes widened as she watched her. "Himiko." She began to sob as she fell to her knees. The fake gun fell, sliding underneath the couch, while the wooden staff landed just in front of her. "I thought it had finally come for me. I thought I was going to die. Ooh-wah." As the woman cried, Kyle and Himiko shared a look, Kyle raising his brows in a silent question. Himiko just shrugged, then leaned towards him to whisper in his ear. "She was this way when she hired me." "I see." What would make a fully grown woman bawl out her eyes like this? Or is she just plain crazy? Kyle wondered. "What is that you're taking about?" Kyle was about to ask when Himiko placed her hand on his lips, silencing him. Then she slowly shook her head. "Don't even ask. Do you really want to know?" The head librarian was suddenly right in front of them, floating just above the couch like a ghost. Her expression had shifted, the fearful look twisting into one that seemed greatly exaggerated, her voice growing colder as she stared right into his eyes. Kyle suddenly had a bad premonition. Now she won't stop until she is done. Himiko covered her eyes with her hand and relaxed her back on him. At least I won't have to suffer alone this time. The librarian chuckled and began floating around them, while Kyle took a moment to analyze her quirk. Her quirk is actually pretty useful. But Kyle could already fly, so it wasn't of use to him. Pay attention, the woman said, bringing back his attention to her. It happened about 5 years ago. As though the sky was cooperating with the weird woman's fairy tales, lightning struck, a resounding boom causing the windows to tremble slightly. The woman smirked. Kagura Central Library has been around since the late 1900s, established by my forefathers and passed down from one heir to the next. For decades, there have been strange occurrences occurring in the library, things that no one could fathom. Sometimes, books would just vanish into thin air. Other times, food wrappers would be found in between the shelves, and sometimes. She paused for dramatic effect. There was a body. Ooh-hum. Himiko cleared her throat and stared at her. Anika began twirling her hair in her fingers, avoiding her gaze. Well, it was only once. Ooh-hum. Anika's shoulders dropped and she nervously began tapping her index fingers together. It was one of our ancestors that passed away from a heart attack. But that's not the important thing here. She quickly added, her face turning red from embarrassment. Couldn't the missing books simply be stolen? Kyle asked, unimpressed by her story. Exactly, and people sneak food into the library all the time. Himiko added, a bored expression on her face. I told you last time, Anika, you need to come up with better points if you want anyone to believe your story. Anika frowned and then angrily flung her arms down, acting like a child throwing a tantrum. I'm telling you, it's true. There is a vampire or something in this library. Kyle chuckled. Well, she's not wrong. Seeing him laugh, Anika got even more frustrated. She floated closer to them and poked Himiko's cheeks. Back me up here, Himiko. He probably thinks I'm crazy. You heard the sounds too, didn't you? Himiko rolled her eyes. Rats, birds, it could be anything playing up in the ceiling. You should forget about these things and get a good night's rest. Anika glared at her and floated back, pouting as she folded her arms across her chest. Even as she was floating in the air, Kyle could see the signs of fatigue all over her. From the way her eyes were dropping close to the bags underneath them, it was clear that she was truly afraid, albeit paranoid. The weather is perfect for a nice long nap, and the atmosphere is just right. Kyle said, picking up his book from the side. You can sleep, Himiko, and I will look out for any ghosts. There was no point in trying to convince her that there was nothing up there. People who held on to these kinds of beliefs made it their identity. Persuading them was like trying to teach a duck to bark. Anika took some time to think about it, her arms shaking just from the thought of what could happen when she closed her eyes. Completely vulnerable to whatever was lurking through her shelves. The monster is more active during thunderstorms. She muttered. Yet, the thought of good sleep was far too alluring. She floated to the ground and relaxed her back on the couch, but not before picking up her staff. Then she faced the fire and sighed. Right, but few minutes. Just a few seconds after lying down, Anika fell asleep, her quiet breaths filling the room. Kyle turned his attention to Himiko. She must be quite a handful. Himiko smiled. She is, but she's also very nice. Anika is pretty lonely managing this place herself, and other workers left because of obvious reasons. Kyle nodded. By the way, you know I could have given you a job if you needed it, right? Himiko was one of the closest persons to him right now, and so he didn't want it to seem like she couldn't count on him for anything, especially considering her past. But you've already been a great help just by being here. Himiko said, turning to face him. I don't want to rely on you too much, you know. Then she smiled mischievously. Plus I get to experience you missing me. I wouldn't have that if I were in the cafe now, would I? She asked teasingly, leaning in a little closer. Kyle smiled, his eyes moving from her peachy face to her approaching lips. Is that so? Their lips drew closer, Kyle's fingers already brushing back her hair when, bam bam bang. Anika jolted, Her eyes shot open and she flew right to the ceiling, clutching her staff in her hands. It's the monster. It is here. Meanwhile, Kyle stared up at the ceiling, watching it with a curious gaze. That sound. There was something strange about it. Himiko wasn't wrong to assume that it was a bird or a rat up in the ceiling, but now that Kyle had heard the sounds Anika had spoken of, he was sure it was something different. It was far larger than a bird, and far more feral than any mouse could be. A large dog. No, it made no sense that a dog would find its way up there. Then an eagle. It still didn't quite fit what he was hearing. Even his geolocation was not accurate, because whatever was upstairs was no longer moving and was probably crouched on the ground, because it was hard to tell it apart from all the junk lined up in the attic. He sighed. That sounds really weird, Kyle muttered as he stared at the ceiling. Anyways, where was I? He returned to his book, trying to pick up from where he stopped. Anika, who was now shivering like a cornered mouse, floated down and tapped his shoulder repeatedly. Hey, aren't you Gigi going to CC check it out? She asked, her teeth clattering from fear. Kyle sighed and stared at the girl nestled calmly on his chest. Normally, he would have gone upstairs to find out what was going on there. But Himiko was like a portable heater, and in the cool atmosphere created by the raging storm, he felt extremely lazy and impossibly comfortable. It would take an earthquake to make him move an inch. I'm not really interested in hunting ghosts today, or whatever is up there. The sound came again, this time louder than before. The banging was so loud that dust fell down the sides of the ceiling. Anika flew down to the base of the couch and covered her head while lifting a shaky finger to poke Kyle. Why were you must be at less CC curious, right? She stuttered, trying to find the best way to convince him. If you go, I'll give you lifetime access to my library and this room. Kyle flipped to the next page and yawned, blinking slowly. Anika flinched at his disinterest, multiple other more enticing options running through her mind. I'll give you this room. You can come here anytime you want. It's cozy, isn't it? Wow. Kyle's eyes widened slightly. Anika felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank goodness. I thought you weren't going to. This book is actually pretty good, Miko, Kyle said, earning a smug smile from her. Anika placed her hands on the floor in despair. When Himiko glanced at her, she sighed and stood up, completely ruining the comfort Kyle had been enjoying. Why don't we just check upstairs? Just a quick glance and we can come back. Anika nodded furiously in agreement. Since his perfect mood had been ruined, Kyle sat up as well before standing up. All right, let's see what is up there. The group of three left the confines of the cozy reading room and ascended the stairs, the old floorboards creaking underneath each step. While Kyle and Himiko were in front, Anika was walking behind them, her staff clutched in her hand like it was her lifeline. They climbed up to the highest floor, which was a large space with multiple tables and shelves littering the space. But it seemed Anika had long abandoned it, because unlike the lower floors that were clean, this area was dusty and had that old book smell. Kyle didn't spend much time on this floor, because he knew at a glance that whatever they were looking for was not here. It was in the attic, the room that competes with the basement for creepiest place in a house. Anika directed them to the staircase that led up to the door leading into the attic. Now that they had arrived, Kyle was actually a bit curious. All right, let's see what is really hiding here. Without wasting a second, he and Himiko began climbing up, leaving Anika at the foot of the staircase. She shook her head vigorously to pump herself up, taking a few deep breaths before she jogged up the stairs to meet them. Wait for me. Kyle stood in front of the door for a few seconds, listening for sound, but all he could hear was quiet breathing, unlike anything he had ever heard before. He glanced at Himiko. Stay behind me just in case. Himiko frowned playfully. Do you really think a bunch of rats will scare me? Let's not waste time. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, with Kyle following after her and Anika being the last. Immediately they stepped into the space. It was as though the atmosphere shifted. Although it was morning, the room was nearly completely dark, save for a flickering bulb up on the ceiling. There were countless old books and supplies stacked up in the attic, things from years ago, so they could not see the end of the hall. But Kyle could sense it. Something else was in the room with them. Even Himiko, who had been unshaken at first, was beginning to get jittery. Bang, bang, crash. They all froze, staring in the direction of the sound, but what greeted them was dead silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 5. Suddenly, the sound of fast-moving footsteps reached their ears. Raspy taps on the cranky wood that echoed through the abandoned attic. Like the movement of a beast. Himiko tensed, her eyes searching the room. Anika was quivering like she was seconds away from fainting. But Kyle remained impassive, his eyes piercing through the thick darkness. Voosh! The darkness around them suddenly seemed to recoil, the intangible black twisting into something against its own nature. Large demonic arms stretched out from all sides of the room, reaching out to grab them. Eek! Anika crouched into a ball, covering her head with her arms. Kyle acted immediately. She could not see him, daggers made of blood appearing right in his hands. He cleaved the nearest hands to pieces, moving to each one so fast that in less than 10 seconds, he had destroyed every single one. But just as he turned towards the source of the attack, long silver claws flashed in his vision, inches away from his face. He darted back, nearly bumping into Himiko as the claw swiped through the air, a shrill ringing in his ears. And then he saw it, dark fuzzy fur, piercing blue eyes, slender arms, and a humanoid shape. It was something in between human and wolf, and the darkness clung onto its fur like a veil of shadows. What the hell is this? Whatever it was confusing Kyle's senses. He was sure it was a human, and yet his senses also told him that it was a feral beast. I'll have to catch it and find out. Kyle's body blurred as he approached the creature with blinding speed, the room blurring as it washed past his vision. The creature's eyes widened, shocked by how fast he was moving, his fingers already nanoseconds away from grabbing it when, whoosh, the creature suddenly melted into the darkness, leaving Kyle to grasp at the plain darkness. In the next second, it appeared right behind him, jaws wide open to bite into his neck. But before it could even lay a scratch on him, Himiko let out a battle cry as she drove her knee into the creature's side. Get away from him. But all she seemed to do was anger the beast. Immediately after Himiko's hit landed, the creature twisted its body in an unnatural manner, screeching right in her face before lifting its large claw. Himiko shielded her face with one hand, the other hand swiftly reaching for a dagger that was hidden underneath her shirt. Still, she was not fast enough. In a split second, the razor-sharp claw would rip into her skin, permanently scarring her face. But as the claw came, it froze in the air as Kyle grabbed it. Then he shifted his foot, launching the creature to the other side of the room. It's surprisingly light. The creature flew to the wall, but instead of crashing into it, it blended into the darkness once more. Silence. Kyle sniffed the air, but he could not pick up a single scent from the room. It was almost as if the creature had completely vanished. But he knew that it was still among them. He could feel it from the shadows. It was watching, stalking them like a predator did its prey in the wild, its feral instincts directing its every step. Voosh! The shadows around them distorted, growing darker, and Kyle picked up its scent a second later, followed by a slight rustling sound that reached his ears. There! He twisted his body immediately, grabbing Himiko by the arm and pulling her to his chest, her eyes widening at the sudden movement. Whoosh! Right from the floor where she had stood mere moments ago, a large spike of shadows emerged, rippling through the floor and driving right to the ceiling. A gust of wind blew past them from the sheer speed and viciousness of the attack, splinters of wood exploding down as it crashed into the wood above. Himiko swallowed, while Kyle's gaze darkened. If he had been just a second late, in that very moment, Himiko would have died. Kyle subconsciously pulled her closer to his chest, his arm tightening around her back. The thought of losing her was something Kyle had never even imagined in the past. He hated the feeling. The creature angrily breathed out, seeing that its plan had failed. Then it turned its dark pupils in their direction, a low growl reverberating in its throat. Strangely enough, the creature had not directed any attack towards Anika, who had fled to the corner of the room. It was almost as if it was only after them. In the very next moment, the monster charged at them on all fours and pounced, only to vanish right in front of him. And then a dozen versions of the monster appeared all around him, mid-pounce. Each one was identical, each one was feral, and each one seemed real. Himiko threw her dagger. the blade phasing through one of the monsters. She pulled out another one just as they descended. But Kyle's gaze sharpened, his eyes moving from creature to creature. He was not trying to spot any differences. That was what he wanted the creature to think. Just as one of them was inches away from reaching his neck, Kyle turned his body, completely ignoring it. The creature realized that Kyle had seen through its trick, its eyes widening, but it was too late. In a flash, Kyle reached out and snatched one of them from the air, his arm tightening around its throat just before he brought it down with a bang, the attic shaking from the impact. All other shadows vanished into thin air as the creature became unconscious. But what Kyle saw in the next moment was something he had never expected. Kyle let go of the creature's throat, staring at its slender body. To think something like this could be so much trouble. Now that he was no longer focused on trying not to become its next meal, he finally figured out what the creature must be. In the world of MHA, there were unfortunate people who ended up with quirks that twisted their bodies, making them unfit to live in regular society. Heteromorphs. For some, it was something they could live with. They had minor mutations that could be managed. Some even got traits that made them strangely attractive, and then there were those who drew the short straw, people often referred to as freaks. They were often bullied and made fun of and found it hard to get any type of job. Is that why they were hiding here? That was a possibility, but it still didn't explain why they attacked them with such killing intent. Himiko stared down and watched the person, frowning slightly. At a glance, it was impossible to tell the gender of the person. A heteromorph? They are pretty tiny. She was right. Although they were a blend of human and wolf, the heteromorph was about the size of a 13-year-old. A kid maybe. If that was the case, then it would only make the condition several times worse. When Anika heard the sound of Himiko's voice, she opened one eye, peeking from where she was crouching, before opening both eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, tears rolling down her eyes. Himiko gave her a thumbs up and smiled wide. "You can stop hiding now, Anika. The monster is down." "Oh, it is." She stared at the heteromorph and flinched as though she had touched electricity. "I'm fine right here." "Heh." Himiko gave her a tired expression. "Oh, and by the way, I was right." Anika folded her arms across her chest, smiling smugly from the side of the room. As they were talking, Kyle grabbed some rope from the side of the room and bound both the heteromorph's arms and feet. "Can't have you escaping," he thought. Then he turned to face the place the person had come from, the deeper parts of the attic. "Miko, can you watch them? I need to check something." Himiko nodded. "You can count on me." "All right, be careful. Call me if there are any signs of waking up." Kyle left Himiko and the heteromorph, moving deeper into the attic. The room had been dusty and messy, just as an attic was meant to be. But as he moved deeper into the attic, everything changed. The floors were neatly kept. There was a waste bin by the edge of the room, improvised boxes that served as furniture. And worst of all, there was even a freaking television set on mute. How long have they been camping here? Seeing this only confirmed his earlier suspicions. It seemed the heteromorph had come here seeking shelter from the world. All we did was interrupt their peaceful life. But no matter how sad the heteromorph's story would be, occupying another person's building illegally was a crime. It would be up to Anika to decide their fate. Kyle. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the sound of Himiko's agitated scream. Kyle immediately sprinted to where she was, only to see her pointing at the heteromorph, a shocked look on her face. Only that the heteromorph was gone. Lying where the beastly creature had once stood was a petite girl curled up into a ball. Her skin was deathly pale, like the first snowflakes of a coming winter, and her body was frail. Framed around her body was thick, wavy, raven-black hair that had grown long and overgrown, and right on top of it were two wolf ears that moved slightly. When Kyle arrived, her eyelids twitched, and then her eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils as dark as an endless void. Lying where the beastly creature had once stood was a petite girl curled up into a ball. Her skin was deathly pale, like the first snowflakes of a coming winter, and her body was frail. Framed around her body was thick, wavy, raven-black hair that had grown long, and right on top of it were two wolf ears that moved slightly. When Kyle arrived, her eyelids twitched, and then her eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils as dark as an endless void. But although she was doubtlessly beautiful, there was one flaw marring her beauty. A thick, dark scar that cut right across her face from the left part of her forehead down to her jaw. Himiko and Anika seemed to both be surprised by the scar but said nothing about it, choosing to remain silent for now. The woman opened her eyes tiredly and blinked, adjusting to the overhead light. Immediately she saw Kyle and Himiko staring down at her. She flinched, a look of pure horror appearing in her eyes. She was shivering in fear like a trapped animal and was looking around the room, searching for any possible escape route. But both her arms and legs were bound and the door was locked. There was no escape. Why is she so scared? If anything, it was they who were savagely attacked that should have been concerned. Now that her beastly visage had faded into one of comely beauty, Anika finally summoned enough courage to approach them. So the monster is actually a girl. It was hard to match the image of the monstrous figure that had attacked them to the vulnerable girl sitting in front of them. But Kyle could see it in her eyes. She wasn't as innocent as her petite figure and face made her seem. Her eyes were not the eyes of a regular person. They were the eyes of someone who had gone through hell and crawled out, barely making it out alive. Her scar was a testament to that. It has been quite some time since I've seen these eyes. Unpleasant memories rushed into his mind. Things he would rather forget once again coming to his remembrance. Back when he was on Earth, years before he died in that accident, Kyle's life wasn't exactly rosy. He was the only son in a family of 3, and so he was showered with excess love, so much so that it made him rather spoiled. He was as fat as a tomato and as cheery as a panda, living life without a care in the world. That was until the day his father died. He could still remember it with perfect clarity, the scenes that would forever haunt his memories. The smell of wet earth, the sound of the rain thundering outside, wet boots and long leather coats that dripped water, a knock on the door, and news that would forever change his life. His father's death. His mother ran mad with grief, the pain of losing her husband far too much to bear. She went down a dark path, isolating herself from the world, and her son, who had once been the source of her joy, became a constant reminder of what she had lost. You see, she had already discarded everything that was left of his father in an attempt to forget. And the only thing left was him. Kyle took in a deep breath and went down on one knee, staring into the girl's dark eyes. She was probably not like him. Everyone's story was different, but Kyle could not help but sympathize with her, because she reminded him far too much of his former self. In the years it took him to crawl out of that pit of despair, there were many invisible scars that had formed in his soul. Dark patches that would haunt him forever. Kyle sighed as he watched her. "Who are you?" The girl was silent, glaring daggers at him while biting into the rope binding her. Anika placed her hands on her hips. "Although she has been scaring me for weeks, I somehow feel bad for her. She was here because she had no place to go, right?" She glanced at Kyle before continuing. "Still, this is no place for her to live. Why don't we call the heroes to help? No. Please no." The girl screamed, cutting Anika off. At the mention of heroes, it was as though her fear had multiplied several-fold. Anika flinched. Did I say something wrong?" The girl's eyes were wide as she stared into space. Her breathing accelerated. "I don't think she likes heroes very much," Himiko muttered. She squatted down and tapped the girl gently on the shoulders. "Don't worry, I don't like heroes either. You won't have to see any of them." The girl nodded slightly, calming down a little while Kyle turned to Anika. "Can you give us a little time? She might be a little scared of you, so it will be hard to get her to talk." "All right. I'll go make us all some tea." She gave the girl one more glance before leaving the room. Luckily for me, that worked. Kyle did not believe that the girl was actually afraid of Anika. If she was, then she would have targeted Anika when she had the chance. He had just said that to make her leave the room because he was sure that whatever the girl was going to say would most likely be too much for her to bear. Kyle sat down cross-legged and folded his arms across his chest. There was no doubt that the girl was powerful and that people as powerful as her attracted attention wherever they went. Not only did she have dual quirks, her abilities in the dark were peerless, incomparable to any other quirk he had ever seen in the entirety of the anime. Normally, since she was on the run from the heroes, Kyle would have expected her to be some sort of hardened criminal. But his instincts were telling him it was something else. There was no way this terrified girl, shaking just at the mention of the heroes, was a criminal. It was strange to think that heroes would give anyone that type of impression. Unless the Hero Public Safety Commission. The dark side of Musutafu City. You know what you are doing here is illegal, right? The girl slowly nodded while staring at the floor. Normally, the right thing to do would be to report you to the heroes. She flinched, her hands tightening on her bonds. But I won't do that. The girl raised her head to meet his impassive gaze, her eyes already moist with forming tears. Kyle allowed his words to sink before he continued. Still, you should know, you can't hide from the heroes forever. Not here. Not in any hiding place you can think of. They will eventually find you. The girl slowly nodded, her shaky voice reaching them. I know. She had come to that conclusion a long time ago, and so she was hoping to live life cooped up here until the day they did. But Kyle's next words caused a dangerous feeling to blossom in her heart. It was hope. I can help you. But first, let's start with the basics. What is your name? The girl raised her head, her cheeks blushed pink, and tears rolled down her eyes. Throughout her life, through the countless years she had spent on the run, this was the first time someone had ever offered to help her. Solvane. My name is Solvane. The cool river breeze was blowing gently over the shore, slowly causing clothing to sway and little dust particles to dance amongst themselves. With each passing day, the weather had been becoming colder, the biting cold of the approaching winter slowly trickling in. A woman was walking alongside a child down the stream, holding her tiny hand in hers, a bright smile on her face as she stared down at her. By her side was another adult who held her hand as well, the child being guided by both parents. But unlike her mother, the man's face was wary. He had bags underneath his eyes, his hair was messy, and he would limp whenever he would take a step. Yet, whenever little Solvane would look at him, his face would brighten up with a smile that never reached his eyes. Soli, what do you want to be when you grow up? Asked her mother, staring ahead as they enjoyed their walk. Solvane unhooked her hand from her father's and placed it on her lip as she considered her mother's words. I want to be a hero, just like Dad. Immediately after she said those words, her father froze, his teeth clattering as he stared into empty space. While her mother gasped, placing her hands over her mouth, she tried to smile but failed, eventually looking away from her daughter. And then her father turned to Solvane and placed his hands on her shoulders. He caressed her hair as softly as he could, his dexterity nothing like it used to be after years of hero work. My dear, he smiled. Give up on being a hero. At that time, Solvane couldn't understand what her parents meant by that or what caused such a reaction from them. To her, heroes were the light of the world, the only reason they could smile and go out as they did every day. She was not wrong. But she wasn't entirely right either. Solvane would come to know that although the shimmering heroes masqueraded around as heroes of justice in broad daylight, those who really kept the peace were the ones who operated at the dead of night. The time when no one would notice when 1 or 2 bodies went missing, the time when no one would think anything about a blood-gurgled scream. Her father was a member of that group, a group whose name was meant to be kept a secret. His quirk was perfectly suited for espionage and assassination, so he was worked by them like a horse, gaining multiple scars both mentally and physically. And when he died, they came for the next best thing. Solvane. Kyle and Himiko shared a look as they watched Solvane nearly break into tears as she retold her story. He took in a long, tired breath and massaged his temples as he thought it through. Hero Public Safety Commission, hey. They were a nasty set of people. Kyle was no hypocrite. He knew that their methods, although questionable, were highly effective. But for people who called themselves heroes and preached a righteous gospel, it was purely hypocritical. Himiko placed her hand on Solvane's shoulder to calm her, her eyes softening as she watched the girl. After Solvane managed to regain her composure, she continued speaking. At first, the Hero Public Safety Commission came to her with a well-disguised offer, a lie blanketed in truths. She was offered admission into UA as a special student, and her family was placed under hefty allowance. They convinced her and her mother that they were just trying to repay her father for his classified service. And Solvane, who had dreamt of being a hero for so long, fell headlong. Solvain's dual quirks are Shadow Step, which she inherited from her father, and Beast Transformation, which she earned from her mother. With these quirks, she quickly rose to becoming one of the top students in UA at the time. And that level attracted unwanted attention in the form of a highly classified villain, a man who took interest in her quirk. Seeing that they were not only at risk of losing an asset but also having such a dangerous quirk in the hands of that man, the Public Safety Commission sprang into action. It was a rainy day just like this. Each drop of water was like fire on her hot skin as she breathlessly stood in front of that man. An impossibility. No matter how much she fought, no matter how much skill she used, he always had a quirk to counter. The top UA student was reduced to a mere punching bag. Solvain remembered that feeling of being helpless, weak, and afraid. But thanks to the Public Safety Commission, she managed to get out of there with her quirk intact. The hero in charge of her moved as fast as she could, navigating the city like she knew each nook and cranny of the place. Still, they could only go so far before they were caught by that man. Solvain and the hero were hiding in an abandoned building, their backs pressed to the wall as they tried to remain as silent as they could. She was breathing heavily from the chase, her heart hammering in her chest and legs shaking from overexertion. The hero, on the other hand, was calm as she calculated her next move. Strangely, after they were cornered, something about her seemed to shift, and she wore a pained expression as the man was minutes away from reaching them. She had risked her life to save Solvain, and just for the sake of one child, multiple heroes were already dead. I was right about heroes all along. Solvain thought, her heart breaking at the thought of how many people had died trying to save her. She grabbed the woman's arm, her gaze downcast. "Thank you, for everything." The woman flinched, her eyes widening slightly as tears glistened in her eyes. Then she sucked in a sharp breath, her features twisting into one of cold, ruthless composure. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper as she lifted her gun. Since there was no way of stopping the man from taking her quirk, she had chosen the most logical option she had left. Eliminate the quirk altogether. Her logic was sound, flawless, and efficient. But it was far from being heroic. It was then her father's words rang in her ears, with more clarity than they ever had. Give up on being a hero. Her father had lived this life. He had borne uncountable burdens. How did he feel each time she would call him a hero? The thought of it made her heart ache. The barrel flared, the explosive roar of the gun filled the room, and Solvain collapsed, her blood forming a pool around her petite frame. Maybe it was because the hero hesitated, or maybe it was just sheer luck, but when she tried to dodge, the bullet ended up grazing her face. The rest of what happened was blurry, but Solvain remembered waking up hours later, with no signs or traces of either the heroes or villains. And so she ran and has been hiding away ever since then. It's been 7 years since that happened. She muttered, hugging her knees. Her words gave Himiko a pause. 7 years. Doesn't high school start at 15? Solvain nodded, and Himiko's mouth hung open. Sorry to ask, but how old are you? The girl raised her fingers, calculating her age like a child would often do. 22. What? Himiko's eyes widened. But you look so young. Solvain smiled nervously, Himiko's surprise managing to wash away some of the nervous tension in the room. Because of my quirk, I don't seem to age quickly. My dad was that way too. While the two of them chatted, Kyle was still processing everything Solvain had said. Himiko was naturally chatty and extroverted in nature, so it was easy for her to get Solvain to talk, and thanks to her, she was no longer sobbing like she was earlier. But that didn't change the gravity of her words in any way. The anime only showed the important parts of the story, and yet, it showed a little of the dark side of the Public Safety Commission. If the Commission, which was just mentioned in passing, already had so much dirt on their hands, how deep did their evil actually go? Kyle adjusted his position and glanced at the girl, his eyes tracing the scar on her face. They are worse than I thought. Solvain, what do you want to do? Kyle asked after politely interrupting their conversation. She blinked and then thought over his words for a few seconds. Although his question was simple, her years with the Commission had taught her to sense the double meanings in words. And from the way Kyle had easily defeated her, Although he didn't act like a typical hero or villain, it was clear he was not a regular person. Still, Solveig knew what she wanted. It was the same thing she had wanted many years ago when her tribulation started. "I'm tired of running." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "You know what will happen when you stop running, don't you? The moment the heroes or that man get wind of you, your life will be back to what it was years ago." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Solveig's hand tightened on the hem of her shirt as she stared at the ground. She was aware of this, painfully so. That was why for so many years, although she wanted freedom, she knew it was nothing more than a fleeting dream. Her fate was to remain locked away in the darkness, constantly living in the fear of being discovered. Kyle folded his arms across his chest. "At least, that would be the case, unless you have someone protecting you." Solveig immediately raised her head to meet his gaze. For a moment, her chest swelled up with hope, only for it to die down a second later. Nothing in life came free. She had learned that the hard way. I can't kill anyone. That was what her quirk was good for, and that was why the Commission had taken interest in her in the first place. It was hard to think this man didn't want the same thing. Kyle raised a brow. "I'm not asking you to be an assassin. I am asking you to join my cause. I can promise you a life better than this, that is for sure, but I won't lie to you. It will not be a passive life." Kyle glanced at Himiko to make sure that she was listening as well. Originally, he planned to tell her all about it today, but since he was already speaking to Solveig, it was a perfect opportunity to inform her as well. "I am trying to restructure this world," he said, glancing between both of them. "There will be times you will have to fight, there will be times you will have to strive, and there might be times we will shed tears. But that is just how the world works." Solveig bit the inner part of her cheek and took a deep breath. Unlike the Commission that hid their true intentions behind polite smiles and vain promises, Kyle spoke the truth, even when it was not in his favor. And yet, it was hard to put behind her years of distrust in people, to once again put her trust in the hands of another person, especially when it was someone like him. Solveig's gaze darkened. The illusion of choice. It was a psychological technique where you create a false sense of choice, allowing the person to feel a fake sense of free will, when in truth, there was only one outcome at the end. His desired result. Kyle was waving her needs in front of her face and giving her the false perception that she actually had a choice. But in reality, he had cornered her with his words. He knew that she could not pick any other option because she was desperate. At the end of the day, he is no different from them. But I understand if it's too much for you." Kyle smiled and relaxed his arms. "Heh." Solveig's brows creased in confusion. He stretched his arms above his head, creating a light popping sound. "Honestly, having you would have been a great help. But you've been through a lot already." He ran his hand through his hair before he continued. "I'll do what I can to keep you hidden, and help you out whenever you need it." Why is he saying this? The more he spoke, the more Solveig felt her heart tighten. "Your freedom will still come when we fix the city. You don't have to worry about, he clearly has the advantage in this negotiation. Why isn't he using it to force me to join him? Just sit back and relax." "No." Solveig screamed, suddenly losing her composure. And here I was thinking they were the same. Solveig thought, slowly shaking her head in shame. Now that she knew he was genuine, the thought of living easy, staying away from all the danger while others did the work, was so tempting that she wanted to accept it. But Solveig hated the very thought of it. All her life, she wanted to help people. That part of her had never changed. It was only suppressed because she had reached a hill too steep for her to climb. But if there was a chance, even a faint hope that she could finally do something with her miserable life, then she would take it. With tears causing even her dark iris to glow like polished obsidian, Solveig shot up to her feet, her expression fierce. "Please, allow me to join your group." Now that Solveig had agreed to join him, Kyle had two potential sires. He would have turned her right then and there, but he wanted Himiko to be his first. After speaking for a few more seconds, they went downstairs to meet Anika, who, as promised, had made them all cups of tea. Solveig apologized for staying in her attic without permission. The story they went with was that she had come here after losing all her money in a pyramid scheme. But Anika seemed more relieved that there was never any monster. They all sat down in the reading room, sipping on chamomile tea when Anika glanced at Solvayne. Wait, if there was no monster upstairs, then what is that banging sound I always hear? Everyone turned their attention to Solvayne, who laughed nervously. Oh, that. Her hand suddenly morphed into a semi-wolf paw, and she smacked it on the couch. Thud thud. My TV always has a bad network during storms, so sometimes I have to give it a good smack to get it to work. Anika pursed her lips. That actually makes... Wait, you have a TV up there. He. Solvayne laughed nervously. I'm sorry. Although Anika was surprised, there were a lot of things that were now making sense. No wonder the light bill has been slowly going up. What else do you have up there? Solvayne glanced at the ceiling, her eyes narrowing as she contemplated. Himiko dropped her cup. Is it that many? The petite woman shrugged. A microwave, a music player, a mini-fridge, and a few other things I scavenged from the junkyard. When she finished speaking, Anika's eye was twitching as she took deep breaths to calm herself. Solvayne turned to face her. Sorry, did I go overboard? Anika smiled in pain. Oh, of course not. You have more appliances than I have in my office, but who cares, right? Kyle finished his tea and placed his cup on the table. I'll donate some money to the library to offset the cost she has incurred over the years. He took out his checkbook and began scribbling on it. No, I can't accept. When Anika saw the figure Kyle had written, she cleared her throat, a wide smile appearing on her face. Well, if you're insisting, then it would be rude to reject your offer. Kyle placed the paper in her hand but did not let go immediately. Can I politely ask that you house her for a little longer? We'll come for her when things are a bit more settled. Currently, they still didn't have a base, and he couldn't exactly take her home with him. Anika waved her hand in the air. Of course. No problems here. Kyle thanked her and let go of the check. Not long after, the girls began another conversation, most of it being about Solvayne and how she had lived up there for so long. As they spoke, Kyle zoned out of the conversation, his mind moving to a subject of particular interest. The Hero Public Safety Commission. They were vile. That much was true. But what interested Kyle was not their evil deeds. Rather, it was how they could be beneficial to his plans. What would happen if everything they had done so far were to come to light? Would it only be the commission that would go down? No, the public would not just lose faith in the commission. If planned properly, it would also come back to bite heroes in the rear. A plan was slowly forming in Kyle's mind. Even with his strength, if he were to forcefully impose himself upon the people, it would make him no different from a villain or tyrant. And so, Kyle's plan of changing the city had been unstable and without any actionable course. But what if there was a way to garner public opinion and become saints in the eyes of the public? The Paranormal Liberation War Arc. Kyle remembered the arc perfectly well. It was the greatest stain on the reputation of the heroes, the time when an entire city under their care was wiped out. It was so bad that the hero structure was damaged to the point that they had to request external help. The point in the story that inevitably led to the start of the Dark Deku arc. This arc was the perfect time to act. The public already hated villains, and during that time, the heroes would be on the receiving end of their rage. But what if there was another organization to step up when public opinion was at an all-time low? An organization neither allied with the failed heroes nor the overzealous villains? Kyle paused and sighed. This can work. 8 months. He had roughly 8 months till then to build an organization from the ground up, train an army of vampires, and prepare himself to wrestle the city out of the heroes' hands. Himiko tapped his shoulder, pulling him out of his thoughts. Kyle. Kyle glanced around, realizing that the conversation had long ended, and both Solvayne and Anika were cleaning up. How long did I blank out? He thought. What's up, Miko? Himiko smiled and pointed at the window. The rain has stopped and my shift is over. She offered him her hand. Shall we? Kyle grabbed it and stood up. I hope you have something good planned out for today. She was already pulling him along with her. It was clear that she had been waiting impatiently for the rain to stop. "Trust me, you're going to love it." It was about 4 p.m. in the evening by the time they left the library. After greeting them goodbye, Kyle left Annika and Solvane, making sure to tell Annika to keep Solvane's existence a secret. The mood outside was serene. The atmosphere was humid and slightly cool, the comforting after smell of the rain encompassing them all. They got into the car, and following Himiko's directions, they arrived at their destination. Kyle's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the building. There was no way he could have guessed that this was Himiko's plan for today. A bathhouse. Himiko was skipping by his side, perfectly matching his pace. "I initially wanted to visit the aquarium but thought this place would be better after the rain." A bathhouse. Hey. A certain lewd thought made Kyle's face blush red. He shook his head to rid himself of them. Himiko stopped skipping and held Kyle's hand in hers, the warmth of her fingers soothing his cold ones. "Let's go. I already made a reservation." The interior of the bathhouse was like any typical Asian bathhouse. There was a light smell of soap and perfume wafting in the steamy interior, and the furnishings were all antique-looking to make the place more traditional. As opposed to the library, which had been empty, the bathhouse had quite a few people going about their business, making the place a bit more lively. Himiko let go of Kyle's hand and practically skipped to the counter, where a woman greeted her with a smile. "Good evening. Welcome to our humble bathhouse. How can I help you today?" Kyle walked up to them and rested his back on the counter, facing the other side of the room. "I made a reservation. Can you look under the name Himiko?" she asked, drumming her fingers on the table. Strangely, throughout their drive down to when they arrived, Kyle had noticed a subtle difference in Himiko. It was almost like she was itching to say something but was at the same time trying to restrain herself. He stole a glance at her before looking back at the interior of the place, admiring the decor. Maybe she's just nervous. The woman picked up a ledger and began going through it. "Just give me a second. Let me look through our records." Her face lit up a second later. "Oh, Himiko. I have your reservation right here." She closed the book and gave Kyle a strange stare, a small smile curling up her lips. Kyle's face remained stoic. "What the hell is that look?" he thought. The woman moved around the desk and smiled. "Come with me, I'll take you there." To Kyle's surprise, Himiko had gone out of her way to pick out some of the best rooms in the bathhouse. He was not sure if she felt anything less would not suit his rich tastes or if she was just trying to make his experience more memorable, but he appreciated the gesture. "All right, I'll be on my way now. This is your key." The woman stretched out her hand, the metal key lying in her palm. Both Kyle and Himiko stared at her hand, sharing a confused look before slowly moving their gaze up to her face. "Where is the other key?" they both said simultaneously. The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, other key?" She placed her hand over her mouth, partially obscuring her face, which was now flushed red. "Why, you only reserved one room, didn't you? Please, enjoy yourselves." Too embarrassed to continue the conversation, she grabbed Himiko's hand and shoved the key right into it just before sprinting away, leaving them both dumbfounded. Silence. More silence. Kyle glanced at Himiko, then held his chin, his face hardening. "Miko, I didn't peg you for a pervert. I swear I told her 2 rooms." Himiko screamed, her face turning pink from embarrassment. Kyle slowly shook his head. "Are you sure? I mean, I can understand if... Stop teasing me." Himiko huffed, balling her fists and stomping her feet on the floor like a 10-year-old. Kyle smiled, a small laugh unconsciously leaving his lips. "She's cute." When Himiko saw him laughing, she sighed and stuck the key into the door. "Besides..." Her voice became lower. "It's just like mixed bathing. People do it all the time." Immediately the door was pushed open, a wave of steam blew past their faces, the heat rushing to escape the room. There was a large bathing pool by the right of the room. At the other side were 2 towels and bathing supplies consisting of scented soaps and shampoos. Himiko stepped into the room, and Kyle was about to follow suit when she raised her hand to stop him. "I need to change first," she said emotionlessly and looked straight into his eyes, her gold iris boring into his. Then she leaned forward a little, one hand behind her back while the other hand was placed on him, tracing circular patterns on his abdomen. Her voice was slightly restrained as she parted her lips. "Or, do you want to see?" Kyle was at a loss for words. Himiko smiled mischievously. "Who's the pervert now?" Bang! Before Kyle could retort, the door was slammed right in front of his face. For a few seconds, he just stared at the door, and then he leaned his back on it and sighed. This girl. He was not sure if it was due to his influence or because of the new path she was taking, but she was slowly shifting from the image he had of her after watching the anime. And he loved every single moment of it. He stared up at the ceiling, a light blush staining his cheeks. Ooh hum. Kyle cleared his throat, slowly shaking his head. Bathhouses were businesses that had been in existence since the times of ancient Japan. Day after day, hundreds of people came and left, enjoying the soothing benefits of the scalding hot water. To the customers, they were having the time of their lives, but for the attendants, this is so boring. Slumped back on her chair, head lolled back and hands lying by her sides like she were a corpse, was Rin. Why doesn't anything fun happen in this dump? She got up from her seat and stretched, her body sounding more like an unserviced Toyota Camry from the 90s than an actual living being. Rin was about to continue her shift when someone burst into the room, a wide smile on her face. "Rin, you won't believe what I just saw. There was a young couple at the bathhouse." Rin scoffed angrily and waved her hand in her direction, shooing her away. Couples came to the bathhouse all the time. Just one measly couple wasn't enough to kill her boredom. They booked one room. What? Rin's eyes brightened with life, and she dashed to her friend, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her so hard that her eyes nearly fell down her throat. Could it be them? She wondered, her mind going back to a few hours ago. The time she had modified an order to spark some drama in the bathhouse. It has to be. Unable to restrain her excitement, her fingers dug into her friend's shoulders, an evil smile on her face. "Tell me more." Gossip. Gossip was the fuel that kept these girls running. Meanwhile, in the private bathing room, Himiko was taking off her clothes piece by piece, completely engulfed by the silence of the space. After wrapping herself up with her towel, she got into the bathroom to shower, which was customary to do before soaking in the bath. She twisted the knob, allowing the water to trickle down, bathing her skin, but as she stared at her pale skin, her mind began to wander. I have to tell him today. Himiko knew that this was the right course of action, and yet, she gritted her teeth. Do I really have to? Her little moments with Kyle were something she cherished, but ultimately she was building it up with lies. Lies that could eventually cause their relationship to crumble. All because of this quirk. At the mere thought of Kyle, Himiko's breathing became heavy, the sound of her breaths louder than the overpowering shower. She stared at herself in the mirror and bit her lips, drawing blood. The more she loved someone, the more her cravings grew. And with the speed at which her attraction for Kyle was growing, it was becoming ravenous, to the point that sometimes she felt she was losing her mind. Himiko had held herself for this long. But this night, she knew that she could no longer restrain herself. She glanced up at herself, looking at her pitiful figure in the mirror. I need his blood. Himiko craved to drink the blood of the man she loved. This time, she didn't just want a taste. She wanted a long, satisfying, ah. Himiko slapped herself across the face, her cheeks turning red from the impact. Focus. Himiko. Don't mess this up. Tap tap. A low knock from the other side of the room was Miko's signal to Kyle that she had finished changing. He waited for a few seconds and knocked before pushing the door open. The scent of steaming hot bath water along with perfumes wafted into his nostrils, his vampire senses picking up everything in extreme detail. At the other side of the room, seated at the edge of the hot springs, her feet playing with the water, was Himiko. She had a white towel wrapped around herself, and Kyle could see faint blue clothing peeking out of the towel. A swimsuit. It wasn't exactly a swimsuit, but specialized clothing made for people during mixed bathing to avoid accidents. Himiko glanced at him over her shoulder and smiled. Be quick. Don't spend too long in the shower. All right, I'll be out soon. He walked up to where his own clothing was arranged and grabbed them, heading into the shower. Himiko sat by the water, creating small ripples with her feet while waiting for Kyle to finish bathing. The water felt amazing, so she could already imagine the wonders it would do for her tired body. I wonder if what they said about bathhouses healing is true. Splash! The sound of running water reached her ears, and Himiko twisted her neck, glancing at the closed door. She stared at it blankly for a few seconds, no thought coming to her mind. That was until she heard the shower go off. His coming out, I guess. She paused. His coming out. Himiko felt her face getting hotter, her cheeks on the verge of turning pink, when she mentally reassured herself. This is a bathhouse. There were dozens of people bathing in mixed baths with strangers. Bathing with Kyle was nothing special. She pouted and nodded her head, agreeing with her logic. I've practically cuddled with Kyle. I spent nearly the entire day right next to him and I was just fine. Why then was she embarrassed by a mere bath? Calm yourself, Himiko. Don't blush like a fool when Himiko suddenly froze, her thoughts scrambling as Kyle stepped out. This isn't fair. How am I supposed to win against this? Kyle stepped out of the shower, wearing only a towel, the steam curling around his body as though to keep it to its greedy self. His chest was firm and well-defined, his entire body more like a perfectly chiseled sculpture than the body of a teenage boy. Wet skin, dripping crystal-like water, glistened under the light like polished marble, the light blush of pink making Himiko swallow. He reached for his hair, pushing it back, his biceps flexing as a result of the subtle motion. And his abdomen, my goodness. Himiko tried to look away, but her eyes were refusing to cooperate with her as she devoured his body with complete unwavering focus. And then their eyes made contact. Hey, Miko. Her face suddenly blushed red all the way up to her ears, and her mouth hung open in embarrassment. Before Kyle could say a word, Himiko jumped right into the water. Miko. Tea to the water feels great, doesn't it? Kyle stared at her and sighed, his confusion growing. Did I do something wrong? When Miko finally stopped splashing around in the water, Kyle got into the bath, the hot water immediately embracing his skin in all its steamy goodness. He let out a light sigh, relaxing deeper into the water. This was a great idea, Miko. I don't think any place would have beaten this. Himiko, who had finally shaken off her initial shock, smirked and swam closer to him, both of them right next to each other. I knew you were going to love it. Kyle chuckled lightly. And you were right. Although he loved the rain, it always left him feeling a little cold and icky from walking over mud. The bathhouse was the perfect remedy. Himiko began swimming near him, paddling around the bathhouse as though it were a pool. So how did the festival go? I'm sure you got to meet the pretty hero course girls. He raised a brow. Him? Yes, there were a lot of pretty girls at the festival. Himiko raised her head to glare at him, pouting. Don't worry, none of them were as pretty as you, Miko. Kyle laughed and stared at her. Especially those eyes that shine like the rising sun, no matter how many times I see it. He took a deep breath. I can't just get them out of my mind. What? Himiko's face was beet red, her lips slightly apart as she stared at him. And then, My God, you're too easy to tease, Miko, he said as he began laughing. Himiko angrily rushed over to his side and began playfully punching him while he laughed. I'm sorry. Wait, I'm serious this time. I'm sorry. He was speaking in between laughs, enjoying every single moment. You're going to make my heart burst, you playboy. Her hand came flying at his face when Kyle grabbed both her hands, far too fast for her to react. Silence. Drip. A lone drop of water drifted down Himiko's face, reaching her chin, then dropping to the pool, creating a soft ripple. Their bodies were inches apart, each breath steamy as their eyes bored into each other. Kyle had noticed Himiko the moment he entered, but now that they were this close, his crimson eyes could see everything in far too much detail. The cleavage peeking out from above the towel, the water drifting past it into her body. A faint smell of flowers was coming from her hair. The wet towel clung onto her body, and her face, tinged with red all over. He couldn't help himself. He pulled her closer, and the moment their lips touched, it was pure euphoria. It was their second time, and yet it was even more energetic than the first. Himiko moved closer, her hands tracing over his body in ways that made his mind reel, while Kyle grabbed onto her waist, his hand brushing the wet towel and making its way up. Himiko let out a breathless moan as she leaned closer, her kisses almost desperate. As though she was afraid he would let go, the water was turning turbulent as they shifted their position, Kyle locking Himiko by the side of the bath. He broke off slightly and placed his lips on her neck, slowly leaving delicate kisses on her pale skin until he reached her lips once more. It was barely 5 minutes, and yet, by the time they separated, both of them were sweating, their bodies eager for more. Kyle. Himiko breathed out, her face painted with worry. Her mouth was open slightly as she took heavy breaths, her cheeks dark red and her fangs peeking out of them as though they wanted to be part of the fun. Kyle kissed her jaw and spoke, his voice low. "Miko." She looked away, her shoulders slumping. It looked like she wanted to say something really badly, but at the end of the day, she just looked away. Nothing. After their passionate moment and Himiko's strange reluctance to speak, luckily for them, the awkwardness did not go on. Soon, the mood from earlier faded, and they began to engage in light conversation, the two of them chatting animatedly. But after some time, Kyle decided to change the topic. What was she going to say? Kyle was curious as to what would have caused such a reaction. He smiled and glanced at her. "By the way, you seem to be bothered about something. You know you can tell me anything, right?" He noticed an immediate change in the atmosphere. Whatever Himiko wanted to discuss was apparently serious. She visibly shrunk back, a worried expression appearing on her face. What could it be? No matter how much Kyle thought about it, there was nothing that came to his mind. Himiko sighed and glanced to the side of the room. Actually, her eyes searched the area until they landed on the basket of products at the side of the pool. "I wanted to ask if you could help me wash my hair. I know it's a weird thing to ask a guy, but sometimes it's hard to reach the difficult spots." She smiled and playfully tapped his shoulder. "What? Don't tell me you don't know how to. It's really simple." Himiko quickly grabbed the basket, accidentally throwing some stuff out of it. She smiled nervously. Hee, why am I so clumsy today?" Meanwhile, Kyle was watching her with concern. For the first time since he had met her, he sensed that Himiko's smile was not genuine. Himiko was sitting by the edge of the bath while Kyle was behind her, staring at bottles of shampoo like it was a math equation. "There are so many." He breathed out, scratching his hair a bit. When Kyle wanted to wash his hair, his trusty bar of soap was always available. And if he wanted to feel a little special, he would sneak out Tsumi's shampoo bottle and ignore every other thing. Why were there 5 different bottles? Himiko glanced at him from over her shoulder, and then when she noticed his confusion, she chuckled lightly and began explaining how each of them was used. "I see." Kyle picked up a pink bottle first. "That means I'll start with this." He poured a little of the fragrant substance on his hand and began to apply it to her hair, his hands gently moving in between the strands. Immediately he touched it. He was surprised by how soft her hair was. "Your hair. It looks like you take good care of it." From what he had seen in the anime, Kyle had expected Himiko to be the type that cared less about things like this. Himiko shrugged. "Is there any girl that doesn't take care of her hair?" "Well, I suppose you're right." Outside the bathing room, Rin was sitting atop a desk, her hands folded across her chest and her expression stoic. She checked the clock, noting the time, then looked away, her feet nervously tapping the floor. 5 more minutes. If they moved too quickly, then they would risk encountering them, and if they moved too fast, they wouldn't know what truly happened. By her side, Toru was scrolling through her phone, completely engrossed in what she was watching, as though it were more important than their business today. "Focus, Toru." "Eek." The girl screamed, her phone nearly falling from her hand. Then Toru sighed and glared at Rin. "What?" Rin smiled and glanced at the clock once more. "It's time." The two women left one attendant to handle the new customers and snuck into the bathhouse, following the shadows as though they were spies. "Room 9. Rin repeated in her head as she hurried past the public bathing rooms, arriving at the private areas shortly after. "Rin, isn't this going too far?" Toru nervously asked, her eyes shifting from place to place as though she was afraid of getting caught. "Going too far?" Rin's eyebrows twitched in confusion. "Would you prefer if I died out of boredom?" Die. Rin sighed and shook her head, grabbing Toru's hand and pulling her along with her. Eek. The private bathing rooms were separated from the public bathing areas by a double door. So immediately after they went past it, they could see the various rooms and their numbers placed right atop them. Room 1, Room 3. The two of them walked noiselessly, creeping past them and turning around the hall until they arrived at their destination. Room 9. Rin let out a dark chuckle. "All right, let's see what you guys are doing." Without waiting a second, she pressed her ear against the door. Deeper. Put your fingers a little deeper." Both girls took a step back, their faces completely blank. Then they glanced at each other. "No, it can't be possible. I just heard wrong." Rin placed her ear back on the door. "Is this deep enough? Damn, it's so soft." A light chuckle followed. "Is this why your first time?" the voice asked, her tone intertwined with pleasure. Yes. It's not like my sister will ever ask me for this type of stuff." Then, how? How are you this good already?" Rin felt every hair on her body stand still. Her cheeks felt like they were heated to 1,000 degrees, and her mind was reeling. She jumped back, nearly tripping as she pushed her body against the opposite wall. Her back was pressed so hard against it that she could hear a light groan from the wood. When she arrived, she expected to hear a romantic confession, maybe a few kisses as a new couple blossomed to life. Never in her wildest dreams would she have imagined that. She gulped. What am I listening to? Are they? She placed her hands on her face, wincing slightly as her face turned beet red. "I haven't even. Are all teenagers like this?" Toru had fallen to her knees next to her, steam practically oozing from her head. But their distance didn't save them, because the girl increased her voice, allowing them to hear it even from their distance from the door. "Be a little rough or it won't get in. You're really a novice, aren't you?" That is a little better." Eek. Both girls screamed simultaneously, running as fast as they could out of the private rooms and back to the reception area. When they got back, both of them were breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in their chests as what they heard repeated itself countless times in their heads. "What has gotten into you two?" They both glanced up, nearly jumping out of their skin. "Madam EMI." They both shouted simultaneously. The woman glared at them when she saw their reaction, then grabbed them both by their ears. "What kind of nonsense have you gotten involved in now?" Meanwhile, back in the bathing room. "Be a little rough or it won't get in. You're really a novice, aren't you?" Himiko pouted. Kyle stared at her hair with utmost focus and began rubbing his fingers more vigorously to get the soap to fizz. Then he chuckled lightly. "What is it?" Himiko asked. "Oh, nothing serious." He glanced at the door and smiled. Those girls must have gotten quite the scare. Himiko wasn't even trying, and yet every single word she said hit the mark. After he finished washing her hair, Kyle and Himiko finally got out of the bath, their skin red from the heat. Kyle allowed Himiko to change first, so she got into the shower to change into a bathrobe, and Kyle followed shortly after, changing into his own bathrobe. The room Himiko had paid for had a rest area with a couple of snacks and drinks, so they both moved into that area, shutting the door behind them. Immediately after they had settled down, Himiko breathed out a sigh and turned to face him. She had held back the entire day, constantly pushing her confession forward, but at this point, she could no longer hold herself back. There were just far too many things that could go wrong if she continued to keep it a secret. She wanted to know more about him as well. Keeping this hidden would only make her attempt seem selfish. Himiko sucked in a deep breath and closed her eyes, and then she let it all out. She told him every single detail about her quirk, including her cravings for blood, for his blood. By the end of it, Kyle was watching her with an unreadable expression, completely silent, which only made her feel worse. "Why are you so silent?" she asked, her voice a little above a whisper. But she knew why. Although Kyle had been more accommodating than anyone she had ever met, everyone had their limits, and this seemed to be his own. To have a friend who had to periodically drink his blood. That was too much, even for anyone. Himiko looked away, wiping tears from her eyes with her fingers, and then she breathed out tiredly and stood up. I'm sorry, about my... Her words were suddenly interrupted by Kyle's laughter. Ha ha ha, tilde. Himiko blinked. What is funny? Do you think I'm joking? His laughter continued. If it's too much for you, then just say it, she said, her voice trembling. This is torture. As the words left her lips, Kyle suddenly vanished, appearing right in front of her, and then he pulled her into his embrace. I'm not laughing because what you said is absurd. I'm just relieved because I thought it was something serious. Himiko's eyes widened slightly. What does he mean by... Kyle pushed her back a bit so that she could see his face, and then he opened his mouth. What is the meaning of this? Right before Himiko's eyes, Kyle's fangs, they were growing. He smiled and ran his hand over her jaw, his finger settling on her smaller fang. Miko, the truth is... He paused, as though a heavy load was about to be lifted off his chest. I am actually a vampire. Vampires. Himiko had heard those words countless times throughout her life, but never with such certainty. Whenever anyone discovered what her quirk was, it was the first thought that came to their minds because she was like the perfect depiction of a vampire. Except she was not. All she had was a craving for blood and a quirk that allowed her to transform into whoever's blood she took. She was not strong, nor was she fast in any way. If she were a vampire, then she would be the most basic one in existence. A vampire. Himiko took a step back, staring into his crimson eyes, as multiple thoughts raced through her mind. Now it made sense. The first time she had met him, their brief conversation at the vending machine was one that had been etched into her mind. How could she forget? It was not that there was anything particularly special about that night. It was because of the same thing she was staring at right now. Fangs that made her wonder if they were related in any manner. She let out a tired breath. You're a vampire. She muttered under her breath. If there was anyone in the entire world who could see things from her point of view, any soul who could see things through her lens, who could understand what she was going through on a daily basis, then it would be Kyle. Tears welled up in her eyes, flowing down her cheeks while she repeatedly wiped them off. Himiko. Kyle called out, his voice strained. This is not the reaction I was expecting. Kyle had expected Himiko to be ecstatic because she had found someone like her. Why is she crying? But he soon realized that those were not tears born out of grief or anguish. Himiko lifted her face to meet his gaze, a wide smile on her face as tears rolled down her eyes, cheeks flushed red and her hair adorning the sides of her face. They were tears of joy. Kyle braced himself as Himiko leaped into his arms, her legs wrapping around his waist. You're a vampire. She laughed, lifting her hands up in glee. Before Kyle knew it, he was laughing as well, Himiko's infectious joy enveloping him. They were like that for a few minutes, and then finally, after her celebration, Kyle placed her on the chair next to him while he sat beside her. Now, this was the tricky part of the day. The day he had wanted to come for so long. Quest details. Create your very first sire. Duration, 2 weeks. Rewards, new skill, 20 stat points. Failure, nil. Miko. She hummed, her head resting on his shoulder. Remember my conversation with Solvane? Back then he had purposely kept eye contact with her so that she would know that she was not excluded from his plans. He wanted her to join him, but that was only if she would agree. How could I forget? She grinned. You were so passionate about restructuring the world. She paused and poked his belly. So what are you going to do, heh? Start your own foundation or what? Kyle scratched his head nervously. Well, initially I was going to destroy both the heroes and the villains. Himiko sprang up like a spooked cat. What? Back then, Kyle had been fresh out of an accident that claimed his life. His death was due to a police officer doing too much, the people regarded as the heroes of his old world. His decision back then had been born out of rage, but after thinking it through, he had come to a new conclusion. Kyle's mind went back to what had happened during the UA Sports Festival. Every single person had thrown themselves right in the face of death, just to protect the thousands of people in the stadium. Their actions that day had replayed themselves in his mind dozens of times, especially Mirio, who had gone head-to-head with Pulse, sacrificing himself to protect Najira. He sighed. I've spent too much time with those clowns. Whether it was his time with the Big Three that reminded him of how genuine some heroes actually were, or if it was his rage finally settling down, Kyle was not sure. But he was sure of one thing. The heroes still had to go. The current system was corrupt down to the very core. The heroes who actually had the good of the people at heart took orders from the Hero Public Safety Commission. Individuals who acted based on their own notion of right and wrong, a corrupt organization that would not bat an eye to kill a child if they felt it was the right move to make. The current system had to go. But maybe the heroes didn't have to disappear completely. Kyle could most definitely suppress the heroes. But in this world, there was no shortage of evil. As long as the concept of right and wrong exists, villains will always arise, be they petty thieves or multinational terrorists. And to counter these villains, there was indeed a need for heroes. As stupid as it sounded. So instead of wiping them out, I'm going to destroy the current hero system and build a new one out of the remains. Well, and eviscerate all organized crime in the city. Silence. Himiko's eyes widened, and then a worried look appeared on her face. Although everything Kyle had said made sense to her, she was worried about his safety. For a brief moment, she had been plunged into that world, and so she knew just how dangerous villains could be. I get that he is a vampire, she mused. But can he really oppose them? She breathed out a sigh and stood up. I understand what you mean, but villains are no longer as they used to be. There are two new groups of villains operating in the city, the League of Villains and the Fallen Legion. Himiko rubbed her arm, her eyes filled with worry. There is even a new guy people are calling the Midnight Vigilante. They're already saying he can be on the level of All Might. Himiko's shoulders fell. I'm not trying to discourage you or anything, but the thought of losing you, Kyle smirked and pointed at himself. Him? I'm the Midnight Vigilante. Himiko blinked. Ha! Her voice engulfed the entire room. The man who had taken down Muscular and foiled the League's plans at USJ was Kyle. Himiko was beyond herself in shock. It was impossible to match the image of the vigilante in her mind to the teenage boy sitting in front of her. You might even be weirder than me. She grinned wryly. Then Himiko slapped her cheeks and pumped her fists in the air. All right then, I'm going to join you. Those were the exact words Kyle wanted to hear. He stood up and walked up to her, his expression serious. Then, would you like to become a true vampire? Kyle briefly explained all the advantages of becoming a vampire to her as well as the drawbacks that came along with it. But it seemed there was no need to, because before he finished, Himiko replied with an emphatic yes. She folded her arms across her chest and pouted. I already have cravings, which is the worst part of being a vampire. Besides, as a vampire, I'll have a very good excuse to drink his blood. Himiko mused. She cleared her throat and placed both hands on her waist, her face smug. How will I protect you if I can't do even this much? Kyle laughed lightly. All right then, I will graciously accept your protection, my vampire knight. Don't even start, she huffed as she walked up to him. Himiko moved closer, and Kyle held her shoulders, pulling her closer to himself. She could feel his breath tickle her neck as he inched closer, and then just before his fangs sank in, he whispered in her ear. Thank you, Miko. Himiko's cheeks tingled red, and then his fangs sunk deep into her neck, a sharp pain searing through the point of contact as blood gushed out of the wound. Drinking blood had always been monotonous to Kyle. There were times when the blood was good. There were times when it tasted like plain white rice. So far, only Sakura's blood, for whatever reason, had stood heads above them all. And it still was, but somehow, this was different. The moment Himiko's blood touched his lips, he was hit by a strange surge of euphoria like nothing he had ever felt before. It was a strange feeling. Maybe it was because of the unique connection they shared, or maybe it was because of her unique quirk. But Kyle was not just drinking her blood, he was absorbing her emotions. All her anxiety, her fears, her joy, and her fondness for him. Everything flowed into him from her blood in little trickles, tangling with his own emotions and making him react in strange ways. It was as though, for a brief moment, their minds were connected by a faint but powerful string. Himiko seemed to feel it as well because she gasped, her breaths trembling as she basked in emotions she could not fathom. She caressed his hair, her eyes closed as she sucked in a sharp breath. Their hearts, each light thump, as warm blood coursed through their chests, each little thrum as their hearts shook in their chests. They merged, beating as one. Himiko could feel the sting of Kyle's teeth against her skin and the light pangs of pain from the cut. Yet she felt no pain. Rather, all she felt was pleasure. The sweet type of pain that would often make you wonder if, just maybe, you tilted towards that notorious kink. Meanwhile, a screen flashed before Kyle. Potential sire detected. Do you wish to implant a legacy? Yes. The moment Kyle mentally agreed with the system's question, something in the space shifted. A bright scarlet light erupted from the point of contact, a heavy breeze sending their hair into disarray. Deep inside him, Kyle felt a tiny part of himself break off, only to be reformed. And that little fragment, the seed of change, drifted through his blood and seeped into Himiko, infiltrating her body like a virus. Kyle moved his fangs and took a step back, observing her. Himiko smiled nervously, her heart pounding in her ears. They were both still recovering from the reverie, so none of them spoke at first. But after a few seconds, Himiko let out a light laugh. Is that all? I feel the same as, just as she was speaking, Himiko's eyes changed, her golden pupils shifting to a deep scarlet, the color of blood. Hair. She stumbled forward, tapping her head as though she was trying to knock something loose. I feel weird. Her hands began to tremble, and her muscles spasmed, sending a jolt of pain through her spine. Ack. Miko? Kyle reached her in a flash, holding her before she could fall, her body falling limp in his arms. Miko? Himiko! Kyle screamed, desperation making its way into his voice. But Himiko was unresponsive. Her breathing was ragged, and her body was terribly cold, like that of a corpse. Thankfully, she was alive. Kyle hurriedly placed her on the couch in the room and placed a soft pillow under her head. Ha-ah. Ha-ah. Ha. She continued to take heavy breaths. Her eyebrows creased as muscles flexed and relaxed repeatedly like ripples spreading through an ocean. System, what is happening? The target is undergoing an awakening. The system began. This is the first process in transfiguration. Muscles, bones, tendons, and organs are restructuring themselves to carry the vampire trait. After this stage, the host will awaken and will have to follow the same steps as you did to strengthen their bloodline, after which they will receive a quirk awakening. After reading the system's words, Kyle felt relief wash over him in an instant. He let out a tired sigh and wiped the sweat off his face. Goodness. You should have told me all this earlier. Noted. Kyle glanced at Himiko and ran his hand through her hair. Just fight through it. It shouldn't last long. Although she was still unconscious, when his hand touched her hair, Himiko visibly relaxed. System. What is a quirk awakening? A quirk awakening means the host's quirk will be strengthened, taking it to the second step of evolution. As the sire, the host will also be given the opportunity to ascend one talent. That is an unexpected bonus. Kyle knew exactly what a quirk evolution was. Although it was not mentioned in the anime, there were a number of people that had strengthened their quirks to the point that it could be called an evolution. A good example was Shigaraki, who, from having to touch people with all 5 fingers, was able to decay with as simple a touch. Even Himiko had evolved her quirk at some point in the anime. The system continued. The host will also gain a unique ability sourced from their bloodline. Kyle's eyes widened. Wait, like an additional quirk? Exactly, you can't be serious. Having a quirk evolution was one thing. Gaining an entirely new quirk was just bizarre. That meant his vampire sires would be even more powerful than he could have ever imagined. Kyle smiled proudly. Alright then, anything else I should know? There was a short moment of silence before the system screen appeared in front of him once again. Blood drive. Bloodlings often have an uncontrollable thirst for blood shortly after their awakening. Normally, it can be controlled until after the host has drunk water. But it seems this host is different. Her intense bloodlust might drive her into a state of frenzy. But she must drink water first, or else, the ascension will fail, and the new host will die. Just as the system finished, Himiko's eyes snapped open, her eyes landing on Kyle. One pupil was crimson, like a gleaming ruby, while the other was a deep gold, tainted with shades of velvet. At a glance, Kyle realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Himiko got to her feet almost noiselessly, standing with her back perfectly straight like a sentinel. She was staring at the floor, her eyes wide open. Then her head snapped in Kyle's direction. Kyle was squatting next to the mini fridge, sorting through the drinks available. No, who even drinks Sprite? Ah, there you are. There were 2 bottles of water, as well as a few other drinks. He quickly grabbed the water and unscrewed the top. Himiko smiled when he stood up. It looks like the system was wrong. Kyle had been worried when she suddenly woke up, but so far she had not even made a single violent move. She licked her lips. That can't be good. He raised his hands defensively. Miko? I know you must be eager to get blood. That is how it is for all new vampires. Kyle walked towards her slowly, making sure to make no sudden movements. And then when he was close enough, he stretched the water towards her, cautiously observing her every move. But first, you have to drink this, all right? Swish. There was a blur of motion as Himiko struck, her movement smooth, effortless, and deathly precise. There was a short moment of silence. And then the top half of the bottle fell, the water making a sloshing sound as it poured right over his fingers. Kyle sighed. Don't tell me. Whoosh. Himiko's body blurred as she propelled herself like a missile, the wind from her dash violently blowing her hair back as she closed the distance between them. Her speed had already magnified multiple times over, and she was moving so fast that regular humans would fail to even track her movements. But Kyle saw everything in good detail. Her extended fingers that were reaching for his neck, her taut muscles as they contracted to increase her speed, her mouth which was wide open, and her fangs, which were now the right size. Now we're talking. The ascension was going perfectly well. Now, I just have to make sure I restrain her without harming her in any way. Kyle easily darted to the side and Himiko brushed past him, slamming into the wall. She's still getting used to her vampire speed. Himiko shook her head and turned to glare at him. She braced herself and then dashed, reaching him in a heartbeat. She launched a right jab, but Kyle adjusted his position, his legs remaining rooted in place as he bent his body back, her fist flying right past him. Quickly adjusting her posture, Himiko reached for his neck, her extended claws grazing his soft skin. Sorry about this, Kyle said as he shoved her back with a swift but gentle thump to the stomach. And then she snarled, jumping to deliver 2 breathtaking kicks. Boom! Bang! It was like being hit with a sledgehammer, only many times worse. Kyle blocked both blows, feeling his fingers ache from her newfound power. He took 2 quick steps back, the water nearly falling out of his grip, only to trip on the couch, falling back on the soft cushion. Damn it! Himiko landed right atop him, her thighs locking his waist on both sides, and her arms caging him in. She smiled, her face blushing red from excitement, just before she dug her teeth into his neck. Crunch. Nom. Him? Crunch. Himiko raised her head, only to see that she was chewing on the bottle, and as for Kyle, he was already by the fridge, whistling as he took out the last bottle of water. All right, let's try this again. Once again, Himiko interrupted him, this time with a roundhouse kick that dug into his ribs, sending a jolt of pain through his body. Kyle let out a stifled groan. Wow. He had taken the blow to gauge her strength, but now he was slowly regretting it. Just as he was thrown to the side by the kick, Himiko grabbed the collar of his shirt, pulling him right towards her. Snap! She bit down, only to catch thin air as Kyle tore off his sleeve and sighed tiredly. Come on, Miko. Dessert later. Water first. Himiko rushed forward, her bloodlust intensifying with each passing second. She was not even trying to fight him anymore. Instead, She was doing everything possible to grab him, just so that she could sink her fangs into his neck. Kyle avoided her flurry of blows, ducked as her fingers cut the air above his head, catching a stray strand, then grabbed her back and twisted her to face him, bringing the water to her lips. But the moment they came close to her, Himiko forcefully rocked herself back, doing a smooth flip to escape. She landed on all fours like a cat, her footsteps noiseless. This time, she didn't foolishly rush in. Instead, she searched the room, her frenzied mind thinking of the best way to get him. Unfortunately for Kyle, her eyes landed on the couch. Kyle slowly shook his head. "Don't tell me." Right before his eyes, she appeared right next to the couch and grabbed it with both hands. Creak! Wood groaned, cushions compressing under the strength of her hands as she lifted the large furniture into the air. She turned to Kyle. Kyle smiled and raised his hands in fake surrender. "Let's be rational here, Miko. Are you really going to?" Voosh. She really did it. The couch was hurled right at Kyle like it weighed no more than a pillow, the trajectory set to crush him from above. It came down seconds later, bringing with it a large gust of wind, but Kyle caught the couch with relative ease, balancing it on one hand. "Just drink the water first." Himiko. She was nowhere in sight. And then suddenly, like a stubborn shadow, Himiko appeared right behind him, grabbing him by both shoulders as she drove her teeth right at his neck. But this time, Kyle was ready. He unhooked her hands from his shoulder, pushed her back, and then placed his foot behind her legs, all in one swift motion. Himiko fell back, instinctively closing her eyes while expecting pain, but all she felt was Kyle's hand on her back, stopping her fall, and the cool tip of the bottle as the water was placed into her mouth. Whoosh! Kyle squeezed the other end of the bottle so hard that the water burst out of it, rushing down her throat. She coughed and staggered back, accidentally swallowing multiple mouthfuls, before repeatedly coughing as she choked. Immediately she shook off the feeling. She charged at him, tackling him to the ground. This time, Kyle did not resist. She stuck her fangs into his neck, the blood rushing into her mouth like a leaking faucet. Himiko felt as though she was lost, drowning in a thick pool of viscous blood. Her arms felt like lead, far too heavy and impossible to move. It was as though her head had been passed through a meat processor, and her stomach was on fire. The more that fire burned, the more ravenous her hunger became, until she became like a beast, desperate for blood. She could hardly remember what happened after she blanked out, but soon, she could hear a gentle voice calling her name from the darkness. It was distorted at first, but slowly, the words began to gain clarity. Me. Iko. Miko. Where am I? She thought, slowly opening her eyes, but what she saw caused her to freeze. Pale white skin like polished marble, ruffled black hair that shimmered like raven feathers, a rumpled shirt, and blood, lots of it. She was also sitting on something soft, and there was a delicious taste in her mouth, a warm, slick substance that tingled her tongue in all the right ways. Himiko took a gulp, drinking greedily. She sighed quietly, taking another gulp. She adjusted herself on the warm body. As she drank, her body tingled from pure delight. To Himiko, blood had always been something necessary to satisfy her cravings. There were times when it tasted good, but almost always, it was the same tiring routine. She would have her cravings and then do everything to satisfy them, like a man running back to his pack of cigarettes after swearing to abandon his addictions. But this time, it was different. "I know my blood is delicious, but I'm going to be anemic," came a muffled voice right next to her ear. Hair. Himiko sprang to her feet, her lips quivering in shock, while Kyle was lying on the floor with a smug smile on his face as he watched her. He crossed his legs and winked, still lying flat. "How was it? You just had a taste of premium blood, you know." "So all this time, I was drinking Kyle's blood." The events of the last few seconds flashed in her memory, including the blissful sounds she made while she drank. "He must think I'm a pervert." Himiko could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, and soon her entire face and ears were flushed pink. But when she noticed the blood staining Kyle's neck, she hurried over to him and reached her hands toward him. "Keklai, are you okay?" Swish. Just before she could reach him, A long iron blade tore right out of her arm, stopping just an inch away from his neck. She stumbled back, falling on her butt, and the blade immediately retracted, returning back into her arm. Himiko let out a shaky breath. What was that? Kyle, on the other hand, jumped to his feet and walked up to her, a bright smile on his face as he offered her his hand. Congratulations. You are now a full-fledged vampire. He had completely ignored what had just happened, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Himiko hesitated at first, unsure if the iron would surge out, but Kyle gave her a reassuring nod. She took his hand, and he pulled her up to her feet, brushing off some dirt from her shoulders. Then he raised her arm and inspected it. It looks like you've awakened a new quirk. Himiko let out a tired breath. Being a vampire is much more than I thought it would be. How is that even possible? She asked in disbelief. Kyle shrugged. It is one of the perks of being a vampire. Himiko stared at her arm, watching the point where the metal had emerged. Do you think you can do it again? It should be natural to you. Kyle asked, smiling as he gently massaged her arm. Really? Himiko took a deep breath and stepped back. Let me try. Closing her eyes, Himiko focused on her heart, trying to recreate the same feeling she had experienced moments ago. Like Kyle said, it was nearly as easy as breathing. Swoosh! But it started as a small drop of blood and then surged out, solidifying and transforming to a gleaming silver color. The metal was as sharp as a dagger and 20 inches long. But that was not all. Himiko felt it. It could be more than that. With a thought, the iron wrapped itself around her fist, forming a metal glove before she reshaped it back into the form of a sword. Wow. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Oh that's pretty neat. Kyle tapped the metal as he leaned closer to see his reflection. With more practice, you should be able to do much more with it. He could already imagine the vast applications of the quirk. Himiko shook her hand slightly, and the metal condensed into blood before flowing back into her arm. It feels weird. She muttered as she stared at her arm. I also feel strong, like very strong. And I can hear and see far better than before. Is that normal? Kyle nodded, a proud smile on his face. Then he lifted his fingers, keeping count as he spoke. Improved reflexes, better perception, regeneration, and super strength. You should have them all now that you're a vampire. Himiko's face brightened. I guess being a bloodsucker has its perks. Then she took a quick glance at the room. The entire place had been turned upside down, the formally organized room looking as though a storm had passed through it. Kyle's robes were in tatters. She scratched her head. I don't think they will be too happy about this. Kyle turned his attention to the room as well, and then he smiled, just before he burst out into laughter, Himiko laughing along with him. After they finished laughing, he held her hand, their fingers interlocked. Let's get out of here. Due to Himiko's frenzied state, Kyle's bathrobes were completely ruined, and not just that, they were also soaked in blood. Thankfully, their clothes were still safely tucked away in the bathing area. While Himiko left to get changed first, Kyle decided to check the notifications he had been ignoring. Mission complete. It was time to see the new skill he had gotten. Quest: obtain your very first sire. Mission complete. Rewards: new skill, 20 stat points. Congratulations. You have obtained a new skill. Kyle smiled as he glanced at the next string of words. Bestowal: you can bestow quirks upon your sires through physical contact. Note: a sire can only handle 3 quirks at a time. Not bad. He had been hoping for a new vampire skill, but it was still great to see that with this new skill, he could make his vampires stronger. In the future, he would be handing over some tasks to them. It wouldn't do if they were too weak to handle them. As the reward screen vanished, another screen appeared before Kyle. You have received a talent ascension card. Do you wish to use it now? Kyle gave it some thought before shaking his head. No, he responded mentally. He needed time to think it through. Rushing to upgrade any talent wouldn't do him any good. You have sired your first vampire. Your influence has increased. Influence? Oh, that. Kyle had almost forgotten about it. When he ascended his bloodline and got the ability to sire vampires, there was a certain caveat attached to it. Influence. The more vampires he had under his control, the more his influence over a certain region improved, and as such, the more the world would bend to his will. Finally, Kyle read the last screen. Quest evaluation notice. Quest details. Further ascend your bloodline by creating 5 sires. Special condition. Sires must be people important to the plot. Sires obtained. 1/5. Kyle's eyes narrowed slightly. That means Himiko is still an important part of the plot. There was one confusing thing about the quest he had received. Kyle was unsure if the system meant only characters important to the original storyline, or if characters that could potentially affect the story in the future were included. If it were characters important to the original plot alone, then things might get a little difficult, since convincing them was not going to be easy. But if others were also included, then it wouldn't really change much since there was no way to find out. He stroked his chin, contemplating it, when the door creaked open and a cheery voice reached him. "I'm done. It's your turn." Himiko had changed back into her normal clothes and had her bathrobe folded in her arms as she smiled at him. The injury Himiko had inflicted on Kyle had long healed, and he had managed to wash the blood off the bathrobes using the bathing supplies. Even if it was torn, it was usable, but the room was still in a terrible state. They did the little they could to make it look a little better before leaving some cash on the chair and leaving the bathhouse. Immediately they stepped out of the building, and they both sprinted, Himiko laughing as they dashed toward the car. Although they had left some money for the damages, he was in no mood to offer an explanation. They quickly got into the car, shut the door, and pulled onto the road. When they got to the bathhouse, it was still evening, but now it was well into the night. There were still a few cars on the street, their red lights gleaming as they traversed the road, heading to their various locations. Kyle glanced at Himiko. "How do you feel?" She flexed her fingers and turned to face him, grinning wide. "I feel amazing." Just then, a car sped past them, its bright lights illuminating her face and highlighting her bright smile. Her excitement was infectious, and for a few seconds, Kyle just stared at her. Her eyes had returned to normal, although there was still a faint gleam of scarlet in them. Honk! Kyle jolted, blushing in embarrassment as his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ooh-hum. He cleared his throat. "There are a few things you need to know about being a vampire. These are rules you should take to the grave, okay?" Himiko nodded, listening to him attentively. Rule number 1. A vampire's greatest weakness is wood. Silence. Heh. You're kidding, right? This isn't some anime or movie. Exactly. Kyle complained. How can we be weak to wood? It doesn't even make any sense. Wait, are you saying it's true? Kyle nodded dejectedly, and Himiko ran her hand over her face. Wood. I'm practically allergic to wood now. So what else? I can't eat garlic or what? Kyle waved his hands dismissively. Nah, garlic is fine. How does, you know what? Never mind. What else? Hum. Kyle glanced at her before looking back at the road. You cannot go under sunlight or you'll shrivel up and die. The blood drained from Himiko's face, her mouth hanging open. Kyle, this is not the time for a joke. Kyle's face was hard, not even an atom of humor on his handsome features. I'm not joking. Now that Himiko thought it through, wasn't that the first thing associated with vampires? How did I forget to ask? She scolded herself in her mind before glaring at Kyle. Wait, but Kyle doesn't have an issue with sunlight. Himiko paused. What if it's because he is the vampire lord or something? She was panicking inwardly. Kyle. Keck. How wouldn't you tell me something so important? When she was interrupted by Kyle's laughter, Himiko knew she had been played. She seethed as she grabbed the arm nearest to her and pulled the thinnest amount of skin she could grab. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, okay, he said in between laughter. By the time Himiko let go of his arm, there was a red bruise on his skin, but it was there barely for a second before it returned to normal. Kyle glanced at her and smiled. Do you want to hear the other rules? I think I've had enough rules for one day." They spoke for some time, but shortly after, Himiko stopped responding. She had fallen asleep somewhere along the line, her head rocking back and forth as they drove. It's been a long day for her. The transformation must have taken quite a toll on her body. Kyle pulled over to the side of the road and reclined her chair. There was still a lot he had to teach her, but she had done enough for one day. He changed the location of his GPS to Himiko's place before pulling back onto the street. There was a sound of clicking boots. A graceful lady was making her way through an unknown building. On the city map, all that was meant to be lying here was a vast unused forest, but secretly, deep underground, was a base unknown to most people. The walls were painted white, and there was a thick smell of disinfectant in the air, which caused her discomfort. She rubbed her arms, feeling a strange itch rising. This place was her home, and she hated every single thing about it. The white lady arrived at a large double door and took a deep breath before pushing it open. It should be about time. Crash! Just as the door swung open, there was a sound of breaking glass. Lime green odorous water spilled out of a broken containment unit, a humanoid body sliding out of it. The white lady took her stance, observing him with caution. "So, how do you feel?" Pulse stood up and shook his head. His black hair was dripping with liquid, and his body was slick from having soaked inside it for more than a week. He flexed his arms, a smile creeping up his face as his laughter boomed across the empty room. "I feel amazing." Yellow currents emerged from his body, spewing out of his skin with far more intensity than ever, and then he lifted his other hand, a miniature storm forming just above it. The white lady scowled and turned, her cape fluttering in the wind. "When you laugh like that..." She began walking away. "You almost seem human." It was a cool Saturday morning, a day cooler than most. It was around that time when you could feel the chill of the coming winter coming in little wisps as though to warn you of the approaching cold. Kyle was huddled underneath his blanket, hugging it when his alarm blared in his ear. But no matter how loudly it rang, he did not wake up, his eyes remaining shut. Then all of a sudden, he sprang up on his bed, his heart pounding and his breathing ragged as he tightly clutched his clothing just above his frantic heart. What the hell? His eyes were wide open, his crimson pupils turning a shade darker. Kyle was in a state of panic, but for the life of him, he could not figure out why. Then he slowly calmed himself down, taking slow, gentle breaths until he calmed his raging heart. When he settled down, tiny trickles of memories flowed into Kyle's mind, fragmented images he could not make sense of. Did I have a nightmare? It was an absurd thing to think about, yet it was the likely case. He had a nightmare and had completely forgotten it by the time he woke up. Still, Kyle found it difficult to even imagine what could shake him. He angrily tossed his bedsheet to the side and began walking towards his bathroom to take a cold shower. Me, having nightmares at this age. How strange. After waking himself with the cold water, Kyle went downstairs, perceiving an invigorating aroma the moment he arrived. Sumi was in the kitchen, wearing black dolphin shorts and a free lace shirt that hung loosely on her body, gently swaying as she moved from place to place. As Kyle got to the living room, he said a greeting, his voice slightly elevated so that she could hear him. "Good morning, Sumi." There was no response. "Sumi." She kept on stirring the pan, unresponsive as she stumbled around like an animated mannequin. Is she mad because I was out late? Kyle wondered. No, that is not it. He had lived with her long enough to know how she acted. Sumi was not the type to give the silent treatment. She would rather hound you with questions and scold you than stay still. Kyle got up and walked up to her, then tapped her shoulder. Sumi. SHR. She flinched like a frightened child, letting go of the frying pan, which slipped down the cooker, falling right at her bare feet. In the blink of an eye, Kyle pulled her back and grabbed the pan just as it was a few inches away from her feet. Sumi let out a shaky breath, placing her hand on her chest to calm herself. Kyle? You scared me. When did you get here? Why is she so absent-minded today? Kyle placed the pan back on the cooker and was turning to face her as he spoke. I've been calling you. How come you didn't? When he saw Tsumi's face, Kyle's words hung in his throat. She was a mess. Her dark hair was wiry and unkempt, Her skin was deathly pale, and there were dark circles lining her eyes. All telltale signs of insomnia. "Sis, are you all right?" She smiled faintly and waved her hand at him while turning off the pan. "Of course I'm fine. Who do you think I am?" But Kyle did not look away. He kept staring at her, his eyes probing. And then Tsumi's facade finally cracked. Her shoulders trembled as she took in a deep breath, trying to reel in her emotions. But it all came tumbling out by way of one lone tear that drifted down her eye, making way for the others, her pent-up frustrations coming to her all at once. Tsumi covered her mouth with her hand, uncontrolled tears running down her face, leaving Kyle stunned. He had always known her to be the definition of perfection and efficiency. She always had everything in check and never needed any help. But even steel would bend under sufficient pressure. "Tsumi." Kyle held her shoulder, his expression softening. "What's wrong?" She tried to smile it off but failed, her expression faltering as she did. "What am I doing?" she muttered, her shaking voice causing a pang of pain in Kyle's heart. He had not known her for long, but seeing his composed sister break down like this made him feel terrible about himself. Kyle had been so busy with the festival that he had failed to see the cracks forming, up until this point. They moved to the living room, and when Tsumi had calmed down a little, she told Kyle what had been bothering her. "You have been having nightmares." Tsumi nodded, wiping a tear off her eyes. "I didn't know it was this bad." Some time ago, he had run into her when she was having a nightmare and decided to help her with it. Although he knew about it, he never knew it was to this extent. They were meticulous, frustrating, and frighteningly consistent. Nightmares that haunted her each time she would close her eyes. She had been having them for weeks now, and it had gotten to the point that she could no longer sleep. No matter how many sleeping pills she took, Tsumi was unable to sleep peacefully, and when she would manage to sleep, the nightmares would come to haunt her. But that was not the only problem with what she had said. Kyle, who often had dreamless nights, had experienced something like a nightmare as well for the first time in a while. It didn't make sense. Was it a mere coincidence that Tsumi had been experiencing a string of nightmares, and now he was having one as well? It was too odd to be a coincidence. "I have to look into this," he mused as multiple possibilities raced through his mind. "I'll be fine," Tsumi muttered, interrupting his thoughts as she stood up. She had wiped her face and returned to her usual stoic self, but it was just her trying to use a bandage to seal a leaking bucket. Soon, it would crack, only this time it would be much worse. "Thanks, I think I just needed someone to talk to." She was about to walk back into the kitchen when Kyle grabbed her arm. "There is a new trick I picked up at work, a hypnosis technique that apparently helps with sleeping." Tsumi stared at him for a long second before laughing lightly. "Hypnosis? I didn't know you were interested in that type of stuff." "Come on, give it a try. I'm sure it will work great. The person I learned it from was a real guru." Her face suddenly darkened. "Don't tell me you paid for it." "Well, you can say I labored for it." "My goodness, kind little brother has been scammed," Tsumi mused. But she did not have the heart to tell him. "All right, we'll try it out, but let's eat first." She said it out of courtesy. She had gone to some of the best doctors and taken the most expensive drugs, yet the nightmares only seemed to get worse. Hypnosis. She smiled sadly as she grabbed the plates. This will be the 10th attempt. She had tried it too. Kyle made sure Tsumi was not watching him, and when the sizzling sound of bacon reached his ears, he summoned his stat screen. It was not that she could see the screen, but her noticing him stare into plain air was bound to be weird. What was it called again? He thought as his eyes glanced through his skills. He had picked out a quirk purposely to help Tsumi, Brainwash, Hitoshi's quirk. But Brainwash had a lot of limitations that made it unsuitable for the job. However, Kyle had an ace up his sleeve. The talent upgrade card. That was the only reason he was confident his hypnosis would work. But, should I use this? The talent upgrade card was something he could only get from making sires. It was invaluable. He planned on turning to Solvane soon, but even with 2, there were arguably better quirks he could upgrade. Kyle shook his head. What am I thinking? Since his arrival in this world, even if Tsumi thought he was her brother, It didn't change the fact that she had been kind to him. She had stayed awake on multiple occasions, waiting for him, had gone out of her way to cook for him even when she was tired, and always had little discussions with him whenever they would eat. The answer was obvious. System upgrade brainwash. The talent upgrade card is a single-time use card. Do you still wish to proceed? Kyle nodded. Yes. Upgrade initiated. 1%, 45%, 100%, talent upgrade complete. Brainwash equals compulsion. Compulsion takes dominion over the mind and compels a person to execute a task without fail. Special condition. The person must stare into your eyes and hear your voice for the compulsion to take effect. The effect is greater if the person agrees to be compelled and is less in people with great mental resilience. As Kyle read through the details, a wide grin tugged at his lips. It looks like I made the right choice. The skill was perfect. After breakfast, Kyle did the dishes while he and Sumi spoke leisurely, and when he was done, he came to meet her in the living room. All right, let's begin. Sumi yawned as she raised a brow. Begin what? The hypnosis, of course. Take this seriously, sis. Oh, that. Sumi chuckled as she sat up. She pushed her hair to the back and then smiled. All right, let's see how much of an expert my brother has become. Kyle picked up his phone, playing a classic tune that created a serene atmosphere in the room. It was unnecessary, but it would help him avoid any unnecessary suspicions. Look into my eyes. Sumi stared into the depths of his crimson pupils, her blue eyes drowning in the sight. And then Kyle activated his talent, his pupil expanding till it swallowed his iris whole. He cleared his throat. From this day onward, nightmares are nothing but a foreign concept to you. You have heard of them, but you can no longer see yourself having one. He began, his voice as smooth as honey. Your sleep is blissful, calm, and perfectly peaceful. No bad dreams, no continuous torment. As he spoke, Sumi just stared at him like a lifeless puppet, her mind an open book for his programming. When I finish speaking, you will fall into a deep slumber and wake up perfectly refreshed. Then Kyle drew back. His eyes returned to normal and the music ceased. Sumi blinked. What happened? Are you done? She smiled and patted Kyle's shoulder. I'm sorry, Kyle, but it looks like you have been scammed. The word ceased as she suddenly fell forward, her head bouncing on Kyle's chest. Kyle smiled as he calmly stroked her back. It looks like it worked. Sumi ended up sleeping for the entire day, only waking up when it was already dark outside. It actually worked. She muttered, confused, as she stretched her arms until she heard a light pop. Her sleep had been without a single dream, just pure darkness, and she woke up feeling brand new. She blinked and turned, noticing Kyle sitting next to her. His legs were crossed and he had a book in his arm, but he looked completely uninterested in it. When he saw her, he smiled. Good evening, Sumi. Sumi grudgingly sat up. Evening. I can't believe it actually worked. You're a genius, she said with a smile. Kyle closed the book and placed it on the table. Now that you are well rested, can I ask a favor? Sumi shuffled deeper into the couch, hugging her pillow as she closed her eyes. It was amazing. Not only did she actually sleep, but she felt like she could even go for a second round. Sure, what is it? Kyle averted his gaze. Well, I was wondering. Can I borrow 1 million? Sumi's eyes snapped open and she immediately sat up straight, all traces of sleep vanishing from her eyes. What?
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.